that's me. You're probably wondering how I got into this situation. Well, to understand that, we have to go back. Way back. Hi, I'm back. It's been a little longer than I would have hoped, but we're not here to talk about that. It's Halloween, assuming I get this video out on time. A few years ago, I did a video ranking a bunch of horror movies on a tier list, and I had a ton of fun doing that, and since I don't have a movie to come out this year, we're doing this again. I'm assuming that all of you that have clicked on this video have seen a tier list before, so I'm not gonna spend too much time explaining it. The gooder the movie is, the gooder the ranking it gets. That's about it. You're not an idiot, you'll figure it out. Another thing that's kind of irked me about the original video is not only was it made by 14-year-old me, but there was also no real theme in the movies I included. It was just a random assortment of ones. So this time we're going with a theme. I've handpicked 10 movies, each releasing from each year of the 2020s for a total of 60. Don't worry, I'm not including spoilers for any of them. You can see the entire list here, and you can also skip to whatever movie you want with the little chapter markers at the bottom. Fair disclosure, this is my video. These are all my opinions, and it's my video, so I can say what I want. Fuck. There is some gnarly stuff that happens in these movies, so I feel like I should be able to swear this time. A couple small rules for what is and isn't allowed. Anything under the horror genre, so your horror comedies, your horror mysteries, your horror thrillers, all of which are eligible on this list. But you're not going to find fucking Caillou's holiday movie on here. We're going to avoid direct sequels unless the original one is on the list. We can do Smile and Smile 2 because they're both on the list, but I can't do a sequel to something that came out in like 2014 because the original isn't on the list. And I'm ranking these on scare factor. Obviously, originality plays a big part, and just sort of my overall enjoyment. We're going to go into the rankings pretty soon, starting at 2020 and working our way up. And once those are done, we're going to host the second semi-annual Iron Man 99 Horror Awards show. They're very official, and each movie gets a laurel and $1 billion. One last thing before we get into the video. This is without a doubt the biggest thing I've ever worked on. So go grab a snack and tuck yourself into bed while I'm talking. We're gonna be here for a while. There is a surprising amount of logistics that goes into something like this. It's much more than just watching a bunch of movies. You have to like plan them all and figure out what I have and haven't watched. It's a lot of work. This is over 3 months in the making, and I want to thank my girlfriend for helping me put this all together because she was sort of my manager throughout all of this and helped me with a bunch of logistical stuff. Was that good?
It was very good.
Thank you. Anyways, this is a long one, so strap yourselves in and get ready for me to talk about movies for way longer than I should. And what better place to start than
Among Us in Real Life.
Sus, sus,
Among Us in Real Life.
sus.
Also, this video is getting like 900 copyright claims, so what's one more to the pile? I really wish we could have started with a more eventful year. It's almost like there was something in the air that from now until like early 2022 that delayed all the movies. Anyways, welcome to the list. When you Google this movie, it says it was released in 2019, but it was internationally released on January 3rd, so we're kicking it off right at the start. I hear a lot of discourse about this movie online, and I assume a lot of them are from the fans of the franchise because it's always hard to top the original, but for what it's worth on its own, I don't have nearly as many problems with this movie as a lot of people seem to do. The format I'll be reviewing all these movies in is I'll get all of what I liked out, and then what I didn't like, and then you get the letter grade at the end. And there were some things to like in this movie despite what some people might tell you. I like the idea of how the various stories were interwoven and connected, and it had some interesting points towards the end. The explanations, which I assume tie into the previous movies, made it understandable as a standalone, and that's what good reboots do. I thought the ending was interesting, and I liked a majority of the characters in it. It had some well-structured jump scares and a good vibe and atmosphere throughout. Seeing Elise from Insidious in this was also nice. Now for what I disliked, or my critiques. This movie was very heavy on exposition, like text explaining the movie during the title card levels of exposition, and that's only charming when Star Wars does it. It was quite easy to tell when they really wanted you to know something by how much they brought it up, and sometimes felt like a bit much. I know I said I liked the concept of the multiple protagonists, but it also had its moments where it didn't work too well for me. But all in all, compared to the amount of hatred for this movie I see online, I still thought it was pretty good. What better way to kick off the list than with a solid middle-of-the-road C tier? Remember when I said the 2020s were boring? Yeah, this is another one where I can't really give insightful commentary on because it doesn't really have the most to make it stand out. And it's hard to do research on because there are 3 different alones that all came out this year. I mean, that being said, I'm going to try to be interesting. There was a decent bit to like here. I thought it was well-paced and it moved along. It never really paused, and I thought the plot itself held up. I like movies that are split into multiple parts, even though they don't really mean anything or add anything to the overall movie. I just think it's a cool thing. The acting was good, as was the overall direction and cinematography, and that surprisingly concludes everything I feel like I can say about this one. It's not full of crazy twists or turns that makes it hard to talk about, but rather falls in the not too much to write home about good or bad umbrella. There are other movies on this list, one of which we talk about next year, that do what this one does but are more interesting. If you want a fine movie that you don't really need to think about, I'd recommend this one. It checks a lot of the boxes for a pretty run-of-the-mill stereotypical horror movie, unfortunately. So for that, I think it can sit also comfortably in C tier.
This is a very interesting movie. Like, genuinely, that's not some joke or build up to anything. This is just a very fresh, new take on what horror movies can be. One of the better things to come out of the COVID era along with Prime Fortnite. The main driving point for why I like this movie was the Zoom call layout. It was completely new for its time and serves as a great capsule for what things were really like in 2020. I'm super envious of the insanely quick turnaround for this movie. From concept to release, it took just a couple of months. If you're into production-y stuff, this is a great movie to look at. I thought the acting was great and it did a great job with immersion. This is also without a doubt the shortest movie on the list, with just a tight 56-minute runtime, which I feel like works to its advantage. So many entries on this list drag and bring their overall ranking down, but managing to be in, tell your story, and out in under an hour is pretty great. Never before have I praised a movie for not being a lot of movie, but this is a good use of it. It had some pretty great scares and held a lot of tension right until the end. There are a few small critiques I have, which also work with the praises I give. Because it was so short, I couldn't tell you anyone's name or anything interesting about them, and because of the amount of scares, there were a few that just didn't work for me.
But one thing I am going to keep true with this entire list is that originality plays a huge part in my rankings for these. This was super original and a great way to make something out of COVID. Good, solid A tier.
This is going to be another movie that's tricky to rank. For some reason, it's labeled as horror whenever you do your research on it, so I included it, but it's hardly horror. It's hard to put on the list fairly because I'm judging it against other movies of the genre that this one barely squeaks into. This is the kind of movie that gets labeled as a horror movie because of the subject matter rather than the atmosphere or tone. It's horror because it's about scary things, not because it's a scary atmosphere or tone set by the filmmakers. You can make as many movies about ghosts or serial killers as you want, but that doesn't necessarily earn you a spot in the horror genre. You have to earn it by creating a suspenseful atmosphere, which this movie has very little of, if you ask me. All the characters were sort of mutually unlikable, so I was never really emotionally invested enough to care. But after watching the movie and waiting to write my commentary a little bit, I couldn't tell you one interesting or notable thing any other character did in the entire movie. If you're scared of a specific type of horror, being the smaller scale things in horror terms that are likely to happen to you in comparison to other movies, then this can be right up your alley. But for me, this kind of horror wasn't something that worked too well with me. If they were to have made this a drama instead, I think they would have had to change shockingly little.
All things considered, it had some things that could have been cool, and I see why people could have liked it, but it wasn't for me. D tier.
This is yet another interesting one. I promise I'm not going to say that for every movie. First off, I had no idea Amazon had their own production studio for movies. I know they make some pretty big TV shows, but I didn't know they had a movie arm of that. On one hand, it has some great mystery and potential behind it, and on the other hand, there's just something that feels off about this movie. I couldn't tell you what it is. Maybe I was sick when I watched it or something. More on that later, but there was a good bit to like here. It's a good slow burn mystery, and it's more story and character heavy than a lot on the list, which is always welcome. It focuses on telling an interesting story rather than a myriad of scares with some semblance of story thrown in there. That makes the parts where it is trying to be scary stick out more. And this isn't really a movie that works as anything other than horror. The horror element is integral to the plot, but they're also able to do other things, which I actually think might be the reason this movie feels off. That's the best possible way I could describe it. It's pretty objectively a horror movie, and I have no issue putting it on the list, but it feels like there's almost this second movie playing in the background that isn't really sure what it wants to be. Sometimes it tries to be badass, but doesn't really work. Sometimes it tries to be more of a family drama, i.e. The Dinner and Whiplash, but again, doesn't feel fully committed to it.
Now, are you an edger, or are you a gooner, or are you gonna phantom tax skibbity?
Part of it just feels off. That's the best way I can possibly describe it, and if any of you have also seen this movie, I'd love to hear if you feel the same.
All in all, I still thought it was pretty good. It was cool, had some good themes. I think it sits pretty comfortably in B tier. Yellow for B tier.
Hey, it's our first haunted house movie. You'll get pretty accustomed to these as the list goes on. And given it's a pretty overdone trope, it's tricky to make one stand out, but they did a pretty good job here. One thing that jumps out to me in this one is how well the atmosphere is set up through the eyes of our characters. We see the events through their eyes, and it sets up a really paranoid atmosphere that shows through the whole movie, and I found myself invested throughout because of it. It also does a good job of having the characters do logical things. It's really easy to sacrifice the characters' critical thinking for scares, and the movie sets up why they can't leave their house, and the decisions they make in the meantime seem logical, which is always appreciated. It also had some good scares and solid tension buildings, which is hard to balance with character stuff. The acting was also good from the leads. Spoilers, Matt Smith of the hit Morbius is in this, and it never really felt too slow or completely lost me. It did a good job setting up sympathetic characters, and overall I had a good time. Now, this isn't perfect. You really thought I had no problems with this one, didn't you? No matter how much character work they do, it's hard to ignore that I've played these games before and seen the same tropes before. Some of the scares were pretty stereotypical haunted house shenanigans, and while they definitely tried to put their own spin on it, I probably lost a few of you when I said it was largely a haunted house movie because it's been done so much.
That's not to say I didn't like it, though. I still found it pretty enjoyable, and I would recommend it. It can get a B tier from me. Not the highest of Bs, but a B nonetheless.
This is our first horror comedy of the list, of which there are a few, and as a cliff note for all of them, it can be very hit or miss for me. There's a lot of ways to make one work, don't get me wrong, but there are an equal amount of ways to mess it up. As far as this one is concerned, it was solid. It's around a 70-30 split of comedy and horror because this one ends up being quite light by these standards. But it was still pretty enjoyable. Joe Harrington Keary is a great actor, and I feel like the dude doesn't get enough work. Probably one of my favorite actors to watch, so he's a big selling point. I thought his character was great too, well, maybe actually definitely not the most believable on the list. It's got some great low-budget problem solving if you're into that stuff, and surprisingly avoids looking like a low-budget movie. Reports vary, but it only had around $43,000 to work with, and it doesn't show. This movie looks great, and that's in part to the creative measures taken to work with the budget. But this isn't perfect. It has a message that I felt like came across fairly surface level. Social media turning people into monsters is a cool concept and something pretty new and fresh. I can't think of anything else that does that. But it doesn't dive into the issue as much as it could have. I get it's more focused on comedy rather than expressing themes, and that works, but
Thematically, it wasn't the most in-depth thing I've ever seen. The highest I can give this one is a B.
So for the rest of the list, when I talk about movies being formulaic, this is a great example of the type of movie I'm talking about. Throughout this list you will see, and I'm not exaggerating, probably over a dozen dimly lit, blue-toned, set in a rural house people move into that turns into a maze with some barely explained supernatural elements, all under the excuse of, oh, it's just a big metaphor. Sorry for spoiling the entire movie there. It turns out the titular relic in this movie is just a woman with dementia, which might be the funniest and best thing to come out of this movie. This is one that's hard to commentate because there's so many others on the list that fall into this trap of being just like this, one of which being the very next entry. It has a decent atmosphere in third act at times, but it feels extremely cliche, and except for both the first and last few minutes of the movie, it wound up being pretty forgettable. You know it's bad when I have to look up reviews and plot summaries when I'm writing the commentary not too much later after watching the movie. I thought the acting was pretty good, and the build-up at times was cool. They set up a lot of interesting ideas or scare possibilities, but they all didn't feel fully fleshed out, and by the end, while understanding the theme they were going for, I would have liked to have seen some of those ideas incorporated more. It felt like they had the story it wanted to tell, so it left breadcrumbs for that, but also left a bunch of other breadcrumbs because it was hungry, so that way when only one trail leads somewhere, you're just kind of left confused.
I will admit that I may be being a little extra harsh here because it's the first of its kind, but I wasn't a big fan of this one. D tier. Higher D tier, but still a D nonetheless.
Remember everything, and I do mean everything, I said about Relic like 30 seconds ago? Yeah, well, this is just the same fucking movie, but on a farm. There's very little I can say about this movie that I haven't already said. There are a lot of movies on this list here that are formulaic, and this is one of the most formulaic ones by far. This will be the first time I mention this in the list, but I don't watch these movies in order, and this movie was so formulaic and boring that after watching like 35 horror movies, I had to take a break after this one. That's how formulaic it was. There were a few things to like in this. It had a few jump scares that weren't poorly executed. They were just kind of there. And if this is your only exposure to the horror genre, it would be a pretty decent introduction. The acting was quite good, and you know what, that's really all I can say without just repeating myself too much. This really is just Relic but on a farm, or Relic was just Dark and the Wicked but in a house. Both movies are quite shallow metaphors that the movie thinks are clever and discreet, but realistically, if you've seen some movies like this, you'll be able to clock it in the first 20 minutes, which gives the entire rest of the movie the same feeling as when your friend shows you a video you've already seen, but you pretend you haven't just to try and be nice, but that takes all of the fun out of the video. Please tell me that metaphor makes sense. It had its moments that made it cool, but after watching some other movies before writing the commentary on this one, I still had to read a plot summary just to remember anything.
I feel like I have to give this one a different rating other than Relic because I don't want 3 D tiers in 2020, so fine, it gets a C tier, purely because I like the name and the poster more than Relic.
To close out the year 2020, we have one of the movies on the list that just goes on for way, way too long. This movie is over 2 hours, and arguably my biggest critique is that it doesn't need to be 2 hours long, like, at all. It's also the first one, despite having been like 40 movies deep at the time, that I actually had to suck up and rent. This isn't on like any pirating site. So minus points for that. That being said, there were some choice things to like here. I thought the main girl was good in her role, and the whole plot did grow on me as time went on. It had some cool sequences, and I can tell they wanted to try and subvert people's expectations, which I won't say didn't work. It's a pretty surprising movie. A pretty big praise I have for later movies in the list is for the few movies that just tell older horror stories in the modern era. Where everyone tries to add their own twist, sometimes it's more effective when you just straight up do it. And this, unfortunately, is not one of those movies. This movie pulls some really big twists and turns out of its ass that I can't say I was a huge fan of. It's cool to do some sci-fi stuff every now and again, and I won't pretend it was terrible, it just wasn't for me. I think it could have been cooler if it were a straight up supernatural one. It's also really hard for me to find characters relatable when they're living in these $20 million mansions on the edge of a cliff. It's entertaining, there's no doubt there, but so much of the horror genre's success comes from having relatable or sympathetic like characters. So making them these rich bastards makes it pretty inaccessible for a lot of people, I felt.
Overall, it had some cool parts, but also some not cool parts. See? And yeah, that concludes 2020. I'm sorry it's not that eventful of a year. 2021 is more interesting, I promise.
I suck his dick with a smile for hours at a time.
This is a movie that and maybe even some. Okay, I'm done. Don't worry. That joke went on for a little long because there's really just not much to write home about with this one. It falls under the pretty damn forgettable umbrella, and that's an odd thing for me to say because this movie has a decent bit going for it to make it stand out. It's just not all that interesting. I thought the concept was cool on paper, it just wasn't executed all too well. One of the biggest components of mystery stories is when the characters have a lead and they start to investigate it and then they go, ah, shit. But like, every single choice the characters make in this one almost always leads them in the right direction, and that kind of kills the mystery or intrigue after a while because you just assume the characters are gonna be right. There's not a ton of interesting back and forth or 2 steps forward, 1 step back moments. It's almost too straightforward. I gotta give credit where it's due. It had a cool color palette, but bright 80s neon pinks and blues aren't exactly what I think of when I think of horror. I didn't necessarily care for anyone in this too terribly much, and I found it to be a slow burn that never really paid off as much as it could have.
Now, all in all, it wasn't god-awful. There was some stuff to like here. I can see why it would have its fans. It just wasn't really for me. D tier.
Oh boy howdy do I have some thoughts about this one. Maybe some that are gonna land me in hot water with some people. I know the no sequels rule, but I'm able to include this and its sequel Last Rites later in this list because all the Conjuring movies stand as anthologies, meaning you don't need to have seen 1 or 2 in order to understand what's going on in this one. Also, it's the motherfucking Conjuring, and I do what I want. As per usual with this franchise, there's some good things about it. There's some good tension and cool creature designs, inventive scares that later become iconic with the franchise, and Ed and Lorraine Warren have quickly become horror icons of the 21st century. I know all that, and it's hard to undermine the importance these movies have had on recent horror, but I gotta say, this one just didn't do it for me. I get the idea and what they were trying to do. It's hard to make horror sequels because you have to top yourself with the first one without it being too egregious or over the top, or if dealing with a franchise that by this point is already iconic, not being too self-indulgent. Horror sequels are hard, and unfortunately I find this movie plagued by all of those in different ways. Probably my biggest problem with this one is that it tries so hard to be scary by including so many jump scares that it just kind of cancels out and makes them all sort of mutually bad. A good jump scare requires not only tension, but time in between them. If you imagine your heart rate during one, it starts flat, not dead, but normal, and then builds and builds and builds and peaks at the actual jump scare, and then it takes time for your heart to calm back down. There's a little window of time where you can smile and appreciate it, but this movie never lets you calm down after a jump scare, which leads to no new tensions, which leads to just things happening on the screen that are trying oh so hard to be scary, but just aren't. It's very tricky to make a horror sequel, and while they're anthologies, that doesn't make it any easier. You still have to deliver a product worthy of following the first 2, and I worry they tried too hard to cram as many scares as possible, and it started to lean into more into quantity over quality.
I like this franchise. I really do. It's a big staple of the genre, and I know that. But I have to give this particular one a high C. Just like the juice boxes.
Before I give my commentary, I really want to be nice about this movie. The top Letterboxd review is from someone that worked on this movie, and they talk about how proud they are of it, which I think is a great way to segue into a reminder that these are all opinions. You very well may like this movie, more power to you. Everything on this list is the result of thousands of hours from dozens of people and should be respected for that. But with that being said, I did not like this one. There's a few positive aspects for sure. Jeffrey Dean Morgan was great, he played his part well, and the rest of the cast also did, which features some surprisingly big name actors. I thought it looked nice, the cinematography was good, it had a strong opening too, lots of potential to be realized there, and did a good job hooking the audience, and that's really unfortunately where my praise ends for this one. It is a fine premise, like, it's enjoyable if you're someone that's never seen a horror movie in your life, but if you've seen a few, which if you couldn't tell I have, it is almost painfully obvious at some points. They try to build a sense of mystery or really build things up as a certain way when you just know they're gonna be bad. Pretty much all of the attempts at scary moments I think fell pretty flat on their faces. Not the kind of jump scares where you feel almost upset afterwards, the kind that leave you asking, what the hell was that? The plot was pretty egregious and goofy. Some of the kills and CGI in this were just downright terrible and laughable. And it spends the entire movie banking on a twist that you can clock not even 30 seconds into the movie.
I could keep going, but this has been far too long already. I hate to do it, but there's 60 movies on this list. At least a few of them need to get an F tier.
This is an interesting premise for a movie. That's not a joke, like it's on to something here. I haven't seen or paid any attention to the other movies in this franchise, but I'm okay with talking about this one because it's an anthology again. This movie consists of 4 different short found footage tapes, which I think is a really cool idea. Not only do I love found footage, of which you'll hear plenty about in the next found footage entry on the list, but in short, I think it adds a ton to the horror atmosphere. It's also a big plus that if there were a tape you didn't like, you'd only have to wait around 20 minutes for the next one. While I won't go into detail about the tapes themselves, they're all very different and cover all sorts of bases as to what you can find in a horror movie. Now, unfortunately, that formula doesn't necessarily work for me as much as it does for most of its core audience. I found one of the tapes, specifically the first one, to be quite entertaining. The second one was also pretty good, and then 3 and 4 I was barely invested in. It can be a really hit or miss formula, and while I think it's interesting, it can end up in situations like this where over half of my viewing I wasn't interested in what was happening. They touched on bases I don't care about particularly. I really like what this movie and this franchise have going for them, and maybe it's better when put into comparison with the rest of the franchise, but I wasn't a huge fan of this. Don't get me wrong, a solid chunk of the movie was good. Like, quite good, actually. It's just that when the momentum flatlines halfway through and doesn't pick up again, it sort of kills the movie.
God, 2021 is really not. We are all bottom half of the list so far.
Alright, let me explain. I made this list before actually watching any of them, and when you just Google best horror movies from 2021, this one shows up. It had its premiere in 2021, so I'll base it on that. I know I got like a wide theatrical release next year, but I'm counting it in this year. Plus, 2022 is also a stacked year, and I don't want to cut any from that roster. Plus, it's also my video, so suck my dick. If you watch the last tier list, you'll know how much of a fan of the movie Sinister I am. One of my all-time favorite horror movies, and my first real exposure to the genre, and this is directed by the same guys. Also starring Ethan Hawke. And let me say, that charm found in their previous stuff is readily apparent here. Charm maybe isn't the right word when talking about these, but both this and Sinister have a certain feel around them that I just love. It carries over some similar plot elements, and I love that they provide a great story without leaning into the ghosty bullshit you have to suspend your belief for, while also not completely ignoring it. It's just there, and the movie doesn't get too self-indulgent with a 30-page portion of the script about backstories or anything. It's the odd time where I like the climax this one has. A lot of the time when it's less horror and more character, I don't like it, but the movie built to it really well, and it felt earned, which is all that's needed for a good climax. My one critique, the one thing I would say is holding this back from S tier, is that it wasn't that scary. It had some decent jump scares, and it's definitely a horror because of the subject matter. Shirtless Ethan Hawke is pretty scary, but I feel like it falls more in line with thrillers rather than a big spooky scary horror movie.
All in all, I still thought it was really enjoyable. I'm excited for the sequel, and I think it earned itself a pretty high-seated spot in the A tier. Don't worry, next year we have 2 S tiers. We will get there, I promise you.
Jesus Christ. Before I start my commentary for this one, I forgot to mention in it that this movie has the longest opening credits sequence I have ever seen for a movie in my entire life. We're just gonna leave it in the corner of the screen, and I'm gonna come back to it when it's done, like 3 movies from now. This movie was directed, produced, and co-written by James Wan. He's the man behind the Saw franchise, Insidious, and The Conjuring, and has been involved in smaller ways in so many other big horror movies in the 2000s, and this is one of his only ones that didn't spin off into a franchise, so let's break it down and see why. It's important to note that I sometimes try and predict what rank a movie is going to get when I'm watching it, and this one changed more than probably any other movie on the list. It's pretty solid, all things considered, but I can see why it didn't get spun off into a franchise. It's not as spectacular or iconic as the original Insidious or Conjuring, and it takes quite a while to get good, which can turn some people away from the movie. Anything I refer to in the rest of the list as a slow burn just means it takes a long time to get good. We'll talk about the most egregious slow burn I've ever seen next, so you'll get a better idea there. But when it did get there, the ending was definitely something that stuck out to me, and I thought the third act was done pretty well. It's always a tricky bag to make a mystery story actually pay off and feel like a sound conclusion, and I feel like this one did a pretty good job. Now, unfortunately, there are some flaws here. It suffers from chronic Conjuring syndrome, which basically means it's very gray, unsaturated, and feels overall pretty bland. For the first maybe 60% of this movie, there's not a ton to make it stand out. A lot of the scares have been done before, but that sort of changes in the last 40. It's hard to review this one without getting into spoilers, but once it gets going, it really gets going.
All in all, I'm a pretty mixed bag about this one. B tier.
You already know I'm watching these out of order, but it's important to note for this one that in my watch order, this was number 59. So I have all of the other movies I'm able to compare it to, and I've seen all sorts of good and bad at this point. I've also had this one on my list since the start, so I've avoided spoilers for 3 months, and I'm proud to say this is pretty much everything I thought it would be. I'm going to show you the review spread here, and this is exactly what a movie like this should get. There are your fair share of people that really don't care for this at all, and then there are the other half that think it's a masterpiece and a work of art and the best movie ever made. And unfortunately, there's very little middle ground. Credit where credit's due, this is a good-looking movie. It doesn't have much of a score, but when it does, it's done really well. The acting is really good, and the CGI is probably the best on the list. Not a ton of movies here are VFX heavy, but it's cool to see one every now and again. Oh yeah, in case you forgot, the Malignant title card just finished. Like, that's what I mean about that one being super long. It's good looking, and you can tell the director, I'm not gonna dare try to pronounce that, had a really clear vision, and it was clearly accomplished. Now, this movie was just way too long. Like, holy shit. It's only an hour and 45, but all things considered, it could have been sub-hour. The middle hour is a very stretched out string of events that could really be summed up in like a 2 or 3 minute montage back to some sappy song, and then you could have done the rest of the movie. I gotta commemorate the director for having such a unique vision, but this dragged on and on. Genuinely nothing happens in this movie. If I were to include spoilers and describe beat for beat the movie, you'd think there's enough substance for maybe an hour if they take it slow. Every scene, almost every shot, drags on for easily 10 seconds too long. While looking nice, that doesn't excuse pausing the movie to stare at the pretty frame all the time. No, we don't need to cut from Lammy, that's what I call him, doing lamb things, to a 45-second sex scene for no reason, and then right back to Lammy doing stuff. You're just padding out the runtime for very little reason.
It was fine. It was just really drawn out. I gotta give it a D tier. I can't really give it anything higher because I certainly enjoyed everything higher.
In my watch order, this one is movie number 49, and it's the second of the 49 movies that I've seen that I actually had to suck up and rent. This is a very fresh movie, and it tries to do a lot of things. It's sort of a comedy in parts with some of its characters, and it's kind of a drama with some of its characters, and it's kind of all over the place for what it is. There's some stuff to like here. I fucking love Alex Wolff, like, so much. Dude is such a good actor. I wasn't sure how I was feeling about this movie, and then he showed up, and all of a sudden it got good. Alex Wolff just kind of has that power, I guess, and you thought I wouldn't find a way to glaze Hereditary in this video. I have some weird opinions on this movie. When it's good, quite good, actually, but then something changes and it's bad again. It's very on-off for me. I'm not really doing the things I liked and then things I don't like, because my thoughts are very all over the place here, if you couldn't tell. Just like the ending of this movie. It tries to do a lot while also making sure it has a twist, and it's almost doing too many things, which just sort of makes it all fall flat. I wasn't a huge fan on the amount of backstory, but on the other hand, I thought they've managed to do quite a bit with the premise.
Maybe I just need some more time to get my thoughts straight about this one. I don't know if my opinions on old change by the time this video comes out. I'll leave a pinned comment. C tier.
I mentioned this briefly in my VHS commentary, but I fucking love found footage movies. There's a few ones here, and they're all without a doubt the scariest type of movie to me. Paranormal Activity is a franchise I've largely paid no attention to, but I've heard good things about, so let's see what all the buzz is about. And there's a lot to buzz about this movie. Okay, maybe I'll use a different word. There's a lot to like here. Found footage as a subgenre is easily the quickest and best way to build immersion with your characters, in my opinion, and genuinely the second that green night vision turns on, I'm on the edge of my seat. I thought the setting was pretty unique too. I know it can be seen as a pretty standard creepy town, but hey, it's in the snow, which I feel like adds a lot to the bleak atmosphere this movie creates. I thought the acting was good, any jump scares they had were also effective, and the build-up throughout the first 3/4 of this movie was done super well, and you're probably wondering why my tone is starting to shift.
We had a good thing, you stupid son of a bitch. It was perfect. But no, you just had to blow it up.
The ending of this movie is hot ass, and I'm not going to try and sugarcoat it. I don't think I've ever felt betrayed at the end of a movie outside of maybe Joker 2, but that did this for me. It sacrifices all the clever and unique build-up in favor of having the most generic, run-of-the-mill ending you've ever seen. I've never had the suspense that's been carefully built up over an hour just completely fucking flatline, and it's so infuriating because we could have had a good thing.
D tier.
I'm gonna be really honest with you guys. I started this movie at number 26 on the list. I fell asleep during it. It's not that boring, I was just tired and vowed to come back to it soon, and that ended up being movie number, I want to say 57. So my review here might not be as thorough as I might have liked. It's the only one like this, I'm sorry everybody. There is a decent bit to like here though. As with a lot of the reboots, I hadn't seen any of the previous ones. I didn't know it was a reboot when I put it on the list, and it's not too heavy with legacy characters or rebooty stuff and callbacks as far as I can tell. It's more of a reimagining of the original as opposed to full of fan servicey characters, and because of that can focus on being an actual movie, which I appreciate. I also thought it had some really cool kills. There wasn't really a dull machete here in kill count terms. I thought they were all pretty sick. I thought the story was cool and progressed pretty smoothly. The whole movie was shot and composed really well. This is just a nice looking and sounding one, which is only boosted by the performances, of which all were really good. I know a lot of people thought the ending was rushed, and while I can agree in its little small select parts, I'd rather this than something like Lamb. Point being, I like when movies actually end with a bang, and it feels like they've been building to a conclusion, so seeing it pay off is always fun. on. All those praises being said, there are a few small critiques that I have, which are going to be hard to talk about. Let me preface, I am a white male growing up in an average Canadian household. It's not really my time or place to critique a movie whose goal is to highlight racial injustices, so all my critiques are going to be purely plot related. I think the metaphor kind of gets shoved down your throat a little bit, especially towards the end of the movie. It felt kind of on the nose, and they could have made it more narratively tied. There we go. Those are my critiques. Don't cancel me, please. All that being said, there's a good amount of good in this one.
There's a few different movies that have themes of racial injustices on the list, but I think this one handles it best. A tier. Again, another pretty mixed bag year. I think 2022 is one of the best years for horror, so you're in for a bit of a ride there. Sorry that we had to start with these years. I know they kind of sucked.
Chrissy, wake up! I don't like this! Chrissy, wake up!
This one is going to be hard to judge, because is it horror? Not really. We're not doing the sequel because it's just kind of not horror. It's weird to ditch a genre. It's weird to ditch horror in the sequel, but I think they could get away with it because of how light this one is on the horror side. There's like one jump scare and you really have to be invested in it to actually care about it. Another one where I don't know what I'm gonna show while I'm talking because the trailer gives away like the entire movie. Not that it's a super complicated or in-depth one, it's your pretty standard robot turns bad movie. It had some good parts. I thought Megan was a total girl boss when she wasn't being an evil robot, and I enjoyed the soundtrack. I never thought I'd hear Titanium in a horror movie, but here we are, I guess. The acting was fine, and I thought the effects for Megan were pretty good. Like, she fell into the uncanny valley the movie was going for. I just wish they utilized it more. Also, the acronym for Megan is just stupid. Model 3 Generative Android, and that's it. There's just no N. Unfortunately, there are a lot of things I didn't love about this movie. I've already talked about its use of horror and how I personally found it to be really mid. It felt pretty formulaic, as if that isn't a common enough complaint already. I can see why for the sequel, which didn't make the list, they decided to go a different route and lean more into the action side. I know it was kind of a blunder financially, but I still think it was for the betterment of the franchise.
This concludes my very in-depth commentary. There really isn't much to like or dislike about this one. See?
Okay, so you remember the jump scare from the beginning of the video? Yeah, that's from this one. And that apparently wasn't even my worst reaction to one of these. Here are some of the other pictures of me while watching this. You can sort them chronologically by when I decided I could no longer watch this with my lights down. This is a movie I really never thought I'd properly review. Somehow a Taiwanese found footage movie ended up on Canadian Netflix, but honestly, I'm not complaining. This is the only foreign movie on the list, and I have a theory that the language barrier made it scarier in a way. A big scare factor for this is that feeling of alienation and disconnect with its more odd moments, and I feel like reading it through subtitles and needing to rely more on the visual aspect to gauge what's going on makes it scarier. I was way more invested in these characters than I am normally when I watch horror movies. The performance is hard carried, and I felt legitimately bad every time something didn't go well, which happens a lot in this movie. It was such a good decision to make this a found footage movie because it grounds everything so much more, and by the entire last third of the movie, I was quite literally glued to the TV. If it gets banned from theaters all across China, and the director has to come out and make a statement saying none of it is real, you know you're doing something right. It's definitely a slow burn, and while I get why some people might not like it, especially if you don't like found footage or foreign things, you fucking racist. Anyways, it also has some of the best jump scares I've ever seen. Like, we have an award for that, so you'll hear more about it later.
Yeah, emphatic S. Wholeheartedly recommend if you don't want to sleep.
This is going to be another tricky one to rank, and one you might think shouldn't be included, and I'm also a bit of a fence sitter, but it's good to have some diversity in the list, and according to Google, it's a horror comedy, so I'm going to talk about it. Out of all the movies on the list, I wouldn't be surprised if this one was the lightest on horror. There is very little that's scary about this movie, and I feel like it falls more in line with the Adam Sandler murder mystery movies as opposed to horror. It focuses considerably more on the comedy aspect as opposed to horror, I found, which makes me hardly treat this one as horror. It definitely has its dark undertones and unsettling scenes which cement it here, but I wouldn't go into it expecting to have your skin crawl or you risk being disappointed. However, there were a lot of qualities this movie had. I liked Anya Taylor-Joy and Lex Luthor, and their dynamic was cool. All the cooking sequences were cool, and while it might not have been scary, it was still pretty enjoyable. There were even a few times I got some decent laughs out of me. I thought it stuck the landing really well, as opposed to a lot of horror comedies I see. It felt really poetic and a nice way to cap things off. Horror endings are always really tricky to nail, so it's nice to see one end without ending on a cliffhanger and actually do it well.
It's hard to give this one a letter grade, given how much of an outsider it is, so really for the lack of knowing where to put it, I gotta put it in C tier. It gets a solid B on enjoyability alone, but criteria-wise, I think C is a good fit.
The proper title for this one is actually Lad, because this is the most British piece of media I have ever consumed. This, along with all the other A24 movies on the list, can be summed up as artsy and weird, has plenty of what the fuck moments, and leaves you really confused in parts, but I still actually quite like this one. Every now and again you see something that uses color really well, and this is definitely one of those movies. It has a brilliantly crafted and diverse color palette, which makes the movie stunning to look at. It's the rare case, which we'll see more examples of later, where an actor playing multiple roles works. Sometimes it's iffy, but if it contributes to the story, I think it makes for a good addition. I love me some movies that make me think, and this had its moments where I was really confused, but I'm labeling that as a positive because it was the kind of confusion that makes me want to keep watching as opposed to turn it off because I don't get it. It was super artistic and had some great imagery throughout, and the ending was probably something that would turn a lot of people off from the movie, but I thought it was an interesting way to wrap things up. That being said, this whole movie was about a pretty shallow metaphor if you ask me. Men are bad is pretty much the main takeaway here, and no amount of artsy visuals or colors can take away from that. It's an interesting topic that could have been explored a lot more, with the movie left it fairly surface level. It's hard to comment on this as a straight white man, but it would have been interesting to see some fighting back on this topic. Not all men are terrible creatures worthy of making horror movies out of. Just you.
All in all, it was a pretty decent movie with a good bit going for it. I'd give it a higher end of B tier.
I know I'm making a video where I compile 60 different horror movies over the last few years, making you think I've seen even more, but one of the big directors I've missed out on, no matter how much good I've heard about them, is Jordan Peele. And I gotta say, I'm very impressed. This movie is a prime example of probably my favorite trend I've noticed in recent years, that being taking concepts that everyone tries to add their own twist to and just sort of doing it. This is a movie about aliens. It's not some twist-heavy movie that tries to subvert your expectations 1,000 times or some convoluted metaphor for something. It is just purely a movie about aliens. And sometimes, in a world where everyone keeps adding their 2 cents on top of other people's and seeing who can get the tallest tower of coins, the quote-unquote unoriginal ones end up becoming more entertaining than all of the other ones. This is a pretty long movie for horror standards, clocking in at over 2 hours, and I paused it thinking it had to be almost over, saw there were still 50 minutes left, and was actually excited. You have no idea how rare that is on the list. And it never slows down. It's well-paced all throughout and does a great job hitting a lot of alien-themed bases without either repeating itself, losing what makes it interesting, or speeding through or dwelling on things. It had me completely hooked for its whole runtime. While maybe not being the scariest thing on this list, not by a long shot even, the ending was great and I loved the build-up to it. The ending felt deserved and the climax was easily one of the best on the list. I rarely get enthralled in movies, especially after watching this many in such a short amount of time, but it did that for me. I wasn't expecting all that much from a movie about aliens and just aliens, but it surpassed what I was expecting by a mile and flew into space. Get it?
Anyways, S tier. Hardly up for debate.
I had no idea this was a prequel until I realized it was part of a larger trilogy. I know the no sequels rule, but we have the whole trilogy here. Also, this one is considerably more of a standalone movie than the other two, so it's fair to review it on its own, which is how I'll treat it. This is a very vibrant movie. Before I say anything else, the trailer you're seeing isn't edited by me. I didn't crank up the saturation. It's just really that colorful, which, hey, gives it something to stand out when compared to the dimly lit blue haunted house movies that populate the rest of the list. Mia Goth. Oh my god, Mia Goth. I know I compliment the acting in a lot of movies, and I feel like that drowns it out a bit, but she really is a star. I'm a star! While maybe not being a movie to make my skin crawl with fear, I really appreciate the more psychological approach. It's probably one of the only period pieces we'll see here on the list, so it gets bonus originality points for that too. Pearl herself was also really original. Without going into detail, every kill was unique and they all felt earned. There's no cheap deaths in this movie. Now, when it comes to things I didn't like, a lot of that falls into it being classified as a horror movie. If I had to make a direct comparison to another movie, I'd go straight to Joker, the original, you know, the good one, which is pretty objectively not a horror movie. I assume this one got put into the horror genre because it involves killing, which in that case, then Star Wars is a horror movie because all sorts of people die in that. So that's not really enough for me to classify it as a horror.
All in all, I still really like this one. It was fun, original, fresh, just not the scariest. It still gets an A tier though.
You remember like 45 seconds ago when I said Pearl gets bonus originality points for being a period piece? Well, surprise, surprise, the whole trilogy is. Except now we're in the bright poppin' 1970s. Still hella southern though. There's also not much I might be able to show from this movie. The main characters are porn stars. But regardless, this movie also stands as a good standalone. Given it's 60 years after Pearl, you don't need to see it before watching this. It just gives some good context and callbacks, which is exactly the type of prequel original relationship I like. This is a very textbook slasher film, but that doesn't necessarily subtract from from it. If anything, I think it added to it. This movie screams homage to old horror films, and I love that for it. It really feels like if a 1970s horror classic was made today, something along the lines of Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Halloween. But instead of being set in the modern day, it's set in the 70s, which is such a big part of what made that genre so special. Aside from nostalgia farming, it had some pretty creepy, cool, and also caring bits. Now, this unfortunately wouldn't be a 2020s horror movie if it didn't fall for at least some cliches or tropes. One of the modern ones being unnecessary nudity. Like, that's a surprisingly common thing in horrors now. I'm not going to say it's not effective in making the audience unnerved, but it's just kind of overused. Not with the whole main characters being porn stars thing. As odd as it can be just watching porn for a few minutes, it makes narrative sense, so I can't bash it too hard. There's just people that are naked that do not need to be naked by any means.
It's weird to get a duology that's equally as good. There's a charm to this movie that I can't really describe without you having seen it for yourself. I think it sits right next to Pearl up comfortably in A tier.
This is a big one to talk about without spoilers. We've got the trailer in the background, and honestly, it's probably one of the best trailers on the list. It does so well at hiding all the batshit crazy stuff that happens in the movie, which I'll try and talk around. There's a lot to dive into and enjoy here. This movie is so many different things. At one moment, it's a romance, and the next it's back to horror, and it has its odd jokes or comedic bits that worked for me. I know I've talked about humor in these falling flat, but this time it worked for some reason. It doesn't feel like it has to take itself too seriously, and it wears its more unorthodox bits with pride, and that's great to see. Yeah, the characters make stupid choices. Yeah, it can be over the top. That's what horror movies do. Moving on. Bill Skarsgård was phenomenal in this, by the way. He plays the suspicious roommate slash love interest slash maybe antagonist so well, and I was analyzing this motherfucker every time he was on screen, and he made for some great back and forth. Now, some of those praises do also work as critiques. You can do your research and find this movie was literally written by making it up as they go, and you do feel it in parts.
If I don't know what's going to happen, there's no way the audience could know what's going to happen. So I just tried to follow my nose and surprise myself, and I can confidently say that it is a surprising story because I didn't know where it was going to go.
Some of the choices here were really far-fetched, and while they added to the vibe of the movie, they were just kind of interesting. Is that the best word? Maybe?
There's another Zach Krieger movie on the list that I feel like does it better, so for this one I have to give it a B. It has its weird bits, it has its questionable choices, but it was still pretty good.
This movie, along with The Grudge, are both movies that I reviewed last time too, so for the 8 people that are watching both, my thoughts on this stay pretty consistent. In the years since this has come out, I'm not exaggerating, I've seen it maybe 3 or 4 times, and I still enjoy it every time I see it. I don't think it's a big hot take when I say that this, and its sequel, which we'll talk about later, are the gold standard of what horror movies can be. There's stuff that can surpass it, for sure. I'm not saying it's the quintessential horror movie of the best ever made, but it's really solid. It's got tension and characters and an interesting premise and some great set pieces and visuals, and the acting and score are great, which pretty easily cement this as a great recommendation when someone asks me for just a good horror movie. It keeps you interested and never feels slow despite being a fairly long one. It pulls off a climax that's both bigger and better than the rest of the movie without blowing it out of proportion and seeming disjointed. They really nailed it here. Now, there are some small critiques. There's a lot of jump scares in this one, a lot of the best ones being shown in the trailer, and because of the amount of them, some of them just fall flat and are pretty predictable. There's some tropes and cliches that carry the plot along, but overall, they didn't bother me too much.
Yeah, you know what? Same ranking as last time, A tier. This is a really good movie, and it's my go-to whenever anyone asks me for a go-to horror movie. It's a great little capsule of what you can expect from the genre.
We are closing out the year with this one, and Jesus Christ. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna have to blur this whole trailer. There's nothing too over the top in the trailer, but if you know these movies, it's yeah, I'm just... There we go. So there's a decent bit to like here in concept. Horror is probably the best example of having no budget being able to amplify what you can do. Not only does this one push every possible means to new limits because it's low budget, but there's also a charm here. If we went back 30 years and you see all the Michael Myers, the Freddy Kruegers, Leatherfaces, or Jasons and the like, we don't really have one for the modern era. Let's go through some of the villains and try and find one. Ed and Lorraine Warren, sure, but that's different. No. It's more of a gesture. Probably only because of that one jump scare. No. Reboot. Maybe, you get the point. Slashers are a dying genre, so it's cool to see that we have a recognizable face now, and it does quite well where credits do. It feels just like a low-budget 80s slasher. because it is. That being said, this is the most over-the-top movie I've ever seen in my life. They're known for the gore, and while I think it can be used to elevate a movie, being your main selling point is almost sick. Take away all the gore and you have legit Darman level acting. I know it's low budget, but there are considerably better actors out there, and the plot is something a middle schooler could have written for an assignment, and it has shockingly little going for it. The gore is over the top and unnecessary and didn't act as scary for me, just made me want to turn it off. Also, whoever decided to make this over 2 hours deserves an art level punishment.
There's stuff to like for sure, but it's still way, way over the top, higher end of D tier. All in all, this was a pretty good year for horror. I think this is one of the best years on the list, and hopefully the coming years will be just as good.
Whopper, 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 Junior, Double, Triple, Whopper.
Fun fact, I'm reviewing these out of order, and this was the first one I watched for the whole tier list, so I don't actually have the rest of the list, which makes this one a little hard to rank in comparison, but I'm gonna give it my best shot, damn it. There are a lot of things I liked about this movie. I thought the acting was solid, with Anthony Starr being a standout. The kid was a solid child actor, and visually I thought it was pretty solid. This might just be more of a me thing, but I really like it when horror movies are set during Halloween. I watched this in the middle of July, so maybe it wasn't too effective for me, but it was still kind of a vibe. It had a good couple jump scares scattered throughout, and for the most part I found myself pretty invested. Now on to what I didn't like, which unfortunately was a lot of the second half of the movie. They sort of put it all on a twist, and then when they need the story to keep going, they usher in a bunch of my favorite tropes, including unnamed goons. It had a solid start, but towards the end I found it resorting to a lot of pretty overdone horror tropes that bog it down a few pegs. This has the horror antagonist, like backwards crab walk and all, which if you watch the movie you'll be really confused by that for the first half, because it kind of comes out of nowhere at the end.
Overall, it was solid, nothing too special, good C tier.
Yeah, I know, I said I wouldn't do sequels, but Insidious is a big enough name for a franchise. It's not like this is a mythic pull out of my ass or anything. For better or for worse, you've heard of this franchise before. I've already talked about this one before on opening weekend, so I'll try to keep it brief, but I thought it was pretty good. As far as fifth installments to what should have been standalone movies go, it was, dare I say, pretty good. As always with the franchise, you get some good jump scares, with the MRI scene being probably my favorite. The plot might not be the most memorable thing, but it's got some pretty good sequences and beats. The climax was actually pretty cool, and I liked that they could pause the horror at times to actually focus on the story. The acting was pretty good, and I'm not gay, but Dalton is one handsome man. Now for what I didn't like. We did not need this movie. Like, at all. It ended fine with 2, which I was vocal about last time about not liking, and you can go and make as many prequels as you want. But once you do one 10 years later the demons come back all of a sudden movie, that sort of opens the door, pun intended, to a lot of movies like this. While it was solid, just let the franchise rest at this point.
It had a good run. It's just time to let the franchise rest. The poster's green, so I get C because that's green. Can you tell I'm taking this very seriously?
It's going to be really hard for me not to be horribly biased with this, because as cringy as the fan base for these games are, now more than ever especially, I will semi-shamelessly admit that this franchise had and continues to have such a big impact on me and my connection to the horror genre, both as an avid consumer, but also as a writer and a filmmaker myself. That being said, I'll try to be as unbiased as I can. I personally enjoyed a lot from this movie. I thought it was shot really well, and I loved the bright colors and overall vibe they were going for. Josh Hutcherson plays Mike really well, and overall I thought he was just a really cool and empathetic protagonist. The soundtrack is also probably one of my favorites, and its selection of licensed music was also pretty great. The animatronics were really important to nail, and I'm super glad the movie did good with them. The Jim Henson Creature Shop cooked with these designs, for real. And as much as I'm trying to keep spoilers down, the cameos were a plus. Now unfortunately, this isn't a perfect movie, unfortunately not by a long shot. If you're looking for a movie to make your skin crawl, this isn't it. If you're not into the franchise, I feel like it would leave you confused more than satisfied. It's pretty predictable at points, and as much as I hate to say it, there were a few just flat-out goofy moments.
Have you met them yet?
A lot of the side characters weren't too memorable. I love you, Doug, and until I rewatched the trailer, I sort of totally forgot there was a weird legal subplot, which didn't work too much for me. Overall, as far as video game adaptations goes, it was pretty good. As far as horror films go, not the best.
But my bias still holds up a little bit, which is why it gets a B tier.
I've seen quite a few horror movies in my day, if you couldn't tell, and probably my most controversial take of all of them is that the original Exorcist is overrated as fuck. It's fine, don't get me wrong, it's a good movie at its core, and especially for 1973, it was revolutionary, I get that. But in the modern day, when we've had over 50 years to experience films like this, it's maybe not everything everyone chalks it up to be. I know about the no sequels thing I yapped about earlier, but I'm only reviewing this because it falls into the requel category. The reason I'm talking about the original when I'm supposed to be talking about this one is because it furthers my point that the original only holds up its status because of its time. How does it further my point, I hear you asking? because it's just the same fucking movie, but like worse. I found it to be really predictable, the effects weren't great, and I can't remember a single time I was invested enough to be scared. They really were in the writer's room and just went, what if there were 2 possessed kids instead of 1? And then boom, Exorcist believer. As much as I wanted to give this movie a high ranking and love it because I know it's a well-respected franchise.
Get what you fucking deserve!
D tier. Sorry, everyone, I just offended.
Ah, that's the boom mic. There it is. It's not supposed to be in the movie, and they edited it out of the trailer, but it's right there. I'm on to you. This has been on my watch list for a while. It's something I'd heard a bunch of good things about, and I'm proud to say that it lives up to the hype. It's the only movie here that was released a few years ago and really gives off the vibe that it came out a few years ago, if that makes any sense. I don't get any of the Australian slang they use, but they're watching videos on Snapchat and all the interactions between the teenagers felt pretty authentic. I thought the overall theme and way they choose to demonstrate it with the hand was pretty creative, and I found myself invested in the characters who were also pretty believable, and I always find it hard to stick the landing if you're a horror movie, but the last few minutes of this one are probably the best in the entire movie, so congratulations, they actually stuck the landing here. Notice when I normally list what I didn't like, and there's actually not that much I notably didn't like about this one. I'm not a party person, as if the hour-long video with me ranking horror movies didn't scream that enough, so I guess those weren't my favorite, but to each their own. It wasn't really skin-crawlingly scary, but definitely had its creepy, jumpy, and a few what-the-fuck moments, all of which work together to make this a pretty good horror.
Not quite S, but definitely earns itself a pretty solid seat in the A tier.
This is the first of what I call the bag duology. I thought I was being funny by including this and 2024's Bag Man in the list and trying to compare both of them, and unfortunately, both of them were pretty mutually bad. I wish I could give a good review on this one, I really do, but it's directly under the not interesting umbrella along with Alone and Dark and the Wicked and so many others. It's just sort of there. It has very few qualities that make it stand out, and the only time I see someone enjoying this is if it were their first day on Earth. If you have any experience with anything better than this, you're just going to find it boring and a waste of your time. All things considered, it's a decent premise that could have been expanded on more if it weren't so focused on being a mediocre at best horror movie. It could have been a lot cooler if they delved more into the premise and emotions of the characters and made it more human, as opposed to what it was. Don't get me wrong, my critiques here come from the fact that it, at its core, was an interesting premise, and that if anything, I'm annoyed it wasn't explored more. I didn't love this one.
With the proper writing and directing, I think this one could have turned out pretty good, but as of right now where it sits, I have to give it a D. This is like the bulk of our D tiers. I know it just seems like I'm being a real negative Nancy about things here, but they do get better, I promise you.
Don't worry, Bagman's worse. So, normally I can come up with at least some things to say about these movies. Usually I can be optimistic and come up with at least one thing that I liked about each one, and I'm struggling here, guys. I really am. There's so little to like here. It's not even so bad it's good, it's just bad. This jump-started possibly one of the worst trends I've seen in recent movies, which is just using IPs that are in the public domain to make your movie sell. You don't have to put any thought into making it a good movie. The brain-dead and edgy teenagers are going to come to this one at the sheer mention of Winnie the Pooh horror movie. So yeah, it's going to get itself a sequel and a threequel for some fucking reason. This movie lacks the low-budget charm that the other cheap ones have. It just looks amateurish. All the outdoor scenes look like they were shot in the middle of a forest fire because of the sheer amount of haze, and all the characters had below room temperature IQ, and the antagonists, you know, the whole selling point of this movie, had no substance behind them other than just being a recognizable character. I ran out of breath. This movie could have been the exact same quality, if not better, if it were anyone else as the antagonist. And because of this one, there's a whole underground subgenre of movies like this. There's one about the Grinch now, too. This should not have ever started a movement of movies like these. I can commemorate the filmmakers on actually making a movie, but that's a movie that looks like it was made using Microsoft Word art, Spirit Halloween masks, and characters they didn't create.
I can see why this would work for some people if you really like the low-budgety stuff, but for me, this didn't work in the slightest. F tier.
Another sequel that I can't really justify being on this list other than it's from the Controverse. It works as a great little case study as to how the franchise has evolved, though. They started with one of their main selling points being that it's based on a true story and has since evolved into this shit.
This is the cup of my blood.
Which I know for a damn fact did not happen. I don't know what they were getting up to in 1950s French nun school, but this sure as hell wasn't it. This is also another one that has a really mixed review spread, and I think a lot of the 5 stars are ironic, unfortunately. At least for me, it's under the pretty forgettable umbrella. It comes from the same director as The Conjuring 3, which I've already been vocal about not liking, and this one is only later into the Conjuring franchise, so they're slightly more out of ideas at this point for making things interesting. I have a pretty universal critique about all of the other Conjuring adjacent movies, and that is that the last 30 minutes of each of them are just kind of a blur. There's like 9 different things happening, and the movie does very little able to differentiate it. It's not really a just this movie issue, but they always treat the endings of these movies like it's some Avengers level climax where they're just intercutting like 3 or 4 different scenes and the scenes are happening too fast to have any real stakes to them. A lot of the movie was just sort of fine. It's there because it's a franchise and they have to do sequels to anything. I guarantee you nobody watched the first one and deliberately decided that they wanted a sequel. Money spoke, and thus this one was made by the books with very little liberty taken or anything done to make it stand out.
Shit, I think we have back-to-back F tiers, guys. They're very different kinds of F tiers, but I think they both belong here, unfortunately.
Before I begin with this review, I want to preface something. This is the last movie I'm watching for the entire tier list. After 3 months and over 60 horror movies under my belt, this is the last one. And while I've avoided spoilers, I've heard really good things about this one. And honestly, I've seen how this list ends. I know what tiers are just full by the end. I've heard great things about this one. The first autofill on Google after this is just dog scene. So I was expecting something terrible to happen, and it has a 96% on Rotten Tomatoes. My point here is that I had unreasonably high expectations for this one, and I gotta say, I sort of expected more. I don't want my review to be hindered by my pre-existing expectations. I hadn't seen a trailer or anything, as with pretty much everything here. I had just let my mind build it up to being something it wasn't. Because I love Incantation so much, the second I heard this one was Argentinian, we're really hitting all of our bases geographically here. I was stoked. I like foreign films for the most part, and they're able to get away with more things here than you probably would in North American movies. I thought the score in this one was really good, the setting was cool and really elevated the feel of it all. The kills were all cool and the makeup was well done. However, the characters here made a lot of stupid decisions, and I can usually push aside characters being dumb as just a quirk of the genre, but this one might have been a little over the top. That being said, it was still pretty good, still well done, and I like the overall direction it took.
I would still recommend this one. Just don't go into it with your expectations as high as I did, or else you risk putting it in B tier.
This is another one that I'm going to have a hard time writing about. You guessed it, it's another pretty uninteresting one. So uninteresting, as a matter of fact, that I forgot to record the commentary for this one, so we're doing this one retroactively. On its own, I thought it was fine. Again, pretty middle of the road, so when you compare it to some of the other movies this year, let alone to what this list has to offer, it's hard to stand out. It does some interesting things. I found myself decently invested while watching it, but as I'm writing this a little while after watching the movie, I struggle to remember anything that actually happened. That's not a great sign. It prides itself on being an adaptation of a Stephen King short story, and while that's kind of the case, we only ever get glimpses of characters from the short story, with this taking place as a sort of pseudo-sequel, so don't put Stephen's name on this. It is, as the stereotype with the boring ones go, a pretty simple metaphor. Not one that's particularly interesting or new for the genre either, but pretty akin to a power of friendship type message, which is an interesting direction to take a horror movie, to say the least. I'm not saying horror movies need main character deaths and crazy tension and atmosphere to make it scary, but that's kinda what you need. This movie plays it safe, like really safe to a fault, to where it's afraid to try anything new or take things a step up, or else it loses its PG-13 rating and thus isn't as accessible. Which obviously the studios don't want, so we end up with yet another movie that we've seen before, just under a new name. I hate to do it because it has some talent in it, and I respect the effort to make a movie with a message and all that.
But it's just gotta go in D for me. If it works for you, more power to you. I'm glad it did, but it didn't work too well for me.
This is purely a joke review. I just want to promote some of my stuff, and you can skip through this one if you don't want to watch it. This isn't eligible for awards, and isn't really going to be considered for anything past this point. For those unaware, this is a short horror film I made at the whopping age of 15 all by myself. Like, seriously, I did this in my room by myself. And sue me, I'm including it on the list to say I'm proud of it. And you know what? I think it turned out pretty well. I wanted to shout out this movie because I owe all the success I've had in recent years to this. If I never made this, I wouldn't have the ins and outs in the film industry that I do, and wouldn't be nearly where I am today. It's not that great, in all honesty. The acting is not good because it's me, and it's pretty amateurish in parts.
But hey, I'm proud of it. B tier. Okay, now back to the real movies.
My style is ridiculous.
By now you know the formula. I list everything I like to be nice, and then I talk about my critiques, and we try and balance it to a grade at the end. And I really hate to be mean, but there was just so little that I liked about this movie. I thought Wyatt Russell did a good job. This guy looks like one of the Impractical Jokers. This could have made a good short film. Like 8 to 10 minutes of it could have been good. It's from James Wan. He's done a bunch of good stuff. What's an apt comparison to this movie? Oh, right, The Nun. Sorry, I can't do this anymore. This was not a good movie. While writing this commentary, I learned that this is an adaptation of, get this, a 3-minute short film, which explains a lot about this movie. It's a great short. I'd recommend it considerably more than the movie. But this is a great example of what happens when you try to take a 3-minute short and stretch it to 90 minutes. I found it to be a lot of cliche after cliche, and that's only to move the story along from beat to beat of this insanely paper-thin plot. It had a few solid shots, most of which are ripped straight from the short film. So much of the last half of the movie gets pulled completely out of the movie's ass, and it really just feels like it's making it up as they go. I really hesitate showing the trailer over this because, like, every decent scene is shown in the trailer. I wouldn't even call it fun bad. This shit was just ass.
2024 is off to a bang with a big, stinky F tier.
Another one I've already talked about on the channel, but this movie was just so nice I had to do it twice. I fucking adored the whole bulletin board with crime scene photos tied together with red yarn subgenre, as I call it, so it's no surprise I really liked this one. This was the first of 2 Osgood Perkins movies on the list, and you'll hear similar things for both of them. I adore the way this movie looks, so much so that I'll save all my gushing for the awards show, but I loved how it was framed for horror especially. Every shot has some dark corner or hallway or staircase you can't see the end of, leaving the entire movie with a feeling that something's gonna move, and it really elevates it. This movie has one of the most consistently great vibes I've ever seen. It gives a great small town mystery. I love the colors, the titles, the music. The way it's split in 3 parts worked for me for some reason. Micah Monroe was great as the totally likely autistic protagonist. I normally think being alienated away from the protagonist isn't a good thing, and you could definitely put that as a complaint I have, but I didn't mind it. Nicolas Cage ate up his screen time, and the third act, which I won't spoil because it's great to watch on your own, was enthralling right until the very end. My only big critique, and it's a decent one, is that I didn't love the whole overarching connection between all the characters. That's all I'll say without spoilers because it's a big twist, but I didn't think the movie needed to tie everyone together. I 100% see why they went this way. It's just like basic good storytelling, but also it seemed a little convenient at times.
Overall, there is so much that I liked about this movie. Solid S tier. Easily one of the best movies you'll see on the list.
I'd like to advise that you are now entering a heavy bias zone. This is a movie that was made in my hometown. Like, I know and have worked with some of the people that are in this, and one of my girlfriend and I's first dates was to go see this when it screened in my city. So needless to say, I'm gonna feel pretty positive about this one. This is a low-budget, campy slasher movie, and I love it for that. It's very reminiscent of a somewhat dying genre, but breathes new life into it and feels just like a modern Chainsaw Massacre or Friday the 13th. I think. I've never actually seen any of those. And I have similar praises for this as I do X. Both are refreshing blasts from the past, and I think all of the campiness and low-budgetiness only adds to it. It's always refreshing to see a movie that doesn't take itself painfully seriously and treat itself like the end of the world. It lets loose while also having its fair amount of care put into the characters, and you can tell a ton of passion was poured into this from the people involved. Now, I can't put this in S, obviously. People are gonna call me biased if I do. Personally, I liked it not being too serious, but I can see why people who wanted something more serious wouldn't be fans of it. But for being a campy, sub-90-minute horror comedy, I love what this movie is.
Because of my thoughts on horror comedies on the list, I feel like I can't give it too terribly high. I think the highest I can give it is a solid B tier.
You've heard of psychological horror, and I guess this movie falls under that umbrella, but I'd like to classify it as a new subgenre. A mix of religious and psychological horror, ladies and gentlemen, the one and only philosophical horror. This is really a movie to make you think, or turn off your thinking and let Hugh Grant's very nice voice try and give you a new perspective on things. I thought there was a lot of interesting material to explore here. For a lot of the movie, it's stuff I'd never seen in a movie before. For a large chunk, it's just Mr. Reed unfolding into one of the most interesting antagonists I've seen. He's a lot more calculating, and the fear comes from him outsmarting you rather than being a meat sack like so many other antagonists are. There's so little I can say without getting into spoilers, but it managed to be really captivating and ended up taking my brain on a journey for a lot of its runtime. Now, unfortunately, I didn't find that momentum to keep up for the whole time. This is a very tricky movie to end. I would offer my proposal on how I would, but I'm stumped on it too, which sucks because this movie has a lot of momentum it sort of threw away from me in the third act, when it unfortunately became another dimly lit blue generic horror movie, which bogs it down quite a bit. It still had a lot of thought-provoking moments, but I found it resorting to a lot of overdone tropes to bring it to the finish line.
Sophie Thatcher and Hugh Grant and the other girl were great, and it's a very interesting take on the genre, I gotta admit, and this might piss some people off, but I still have to give it a B tier.
This is a conclusion to the Pearl and X trilogy, and I gotta say, it's rare to have a trilogy, let alone a horror trilogy, where all 3 installments are good. Right off the bat, do I think this one was as solid as the rest of them? No, but there's still a lot to like. We go from the Texas countryside to 1980s Hollywood, which is an aesthetic I can't get enough of. I'm totally biased here, but I love movies set from within the film industry, and there's a lot to ride home with here. here. Once again, Mia Goth is great, and it's an interesting slow burn mystery. Along with the rest of the trilogy, it was shot well, and Ty West is a pretty great director. Unfortunately, this one didn't really live up to the other two, if you ask me. X was considerably more horror-esque than this one and Pearl were. This one attempts to be scary by adding a serial killer and other things you might find on your horror bingo card, but from the tone this movie sets, it's hard to be creeped out. I also wasn't a huge fan of the third act here. It felt like they almost completely ditched horror and went for a more Once Upon a Time in Hollywood approach, which is definitely a way to take this. It didn't satisfy me too much, but I see why people would have liked it a lot. Another thing, and this is more for the whole trilogy, is that Mia Goth, being a phenomenal actor, didn't need to play both Maxine and Pearl. It's a trend to have multiple characters played by one actor, I know that, and it's not the only movie on the list to do so, but it's worth pointing out that it can be very hit or miss, and it was just kinda eh.
Overall, it was still good, it just didn't carry the same weight as the other two. I'd give it a B tier. 3 Bs in a row. That'll change with the next movie.
You know what? Out of all the sequels on this list, there hasn't been a ton of great ones. Sequels in general are hard to pull off, but especially horror ones, and I'm gonna be honest, after 2 years of watching movies and their sequels, I started to wonder, could a good horror sequel be done? Holy shit, they actually did it. They made a sequel that's good. Like, really good. You already know my thoughts on the first one, so it would be really hard for them to make a sequel that I didn't like, and you know that. And you know what? They set up a sequel at the end of the first one that I thought would be pretty good, and I was excited for, but they somehow managed to throw that idea out and replace it with something even better. Good sequels manage to do a few things. They manage to expand on the world and the themes of the original. They either further develop the characters we know, or introduce new ones that are on par, if not more entertaining than the original, and they provide a story that's obviously a continuation of the same story, but manages to be bigger in scale. And I'm very pleased to say that Smile 2 manages to do all of those. Sky Riley is a super interesting protagonist. In my opinion, a drug-battling, returning to fame pop star with some deep-rooted trauma is way more interesting than Rose was, and the settings and plot beats that follow because of her character are super cool. And you really feel like you've seen everything by the end of the first one, and while they repeat some of the moments, it never feels like the same movie over again. By nature, they're gonna have some repeating bits, but I think they expand on them quite well. The ending was pretty much all I could ask for, and if I have one little gripe about this, is that there's an alleged Smile 3 in production already. This is a rare time a horror movie ends on a cliffhanger, and I don't want there to be a sequel.
Call me crazy, but this is one of the best follow-ups to a movie, let alone a horror movie in recent memory for me. Ladies and gentlemen, another addition to the S tier.
This is another one I unfortunately missed in theaters, and honestly I think it would have been a great one to see there. When people come on before the movie and say this movie was made to be seen in theaters, I feel like this is very much one of those movies. So much so to where I had to start this one twice because I was trying to write these commentaries at the same time and realized this is a movie you should really sit and pay attention to. Which I like, don't get me wrong, it's just not everyone's cup of tea. I really like the overall vibe of this movie. The acting was good, the sets were really cool, as were the wardrobe, some of the old-timey dialogue, and in general, the situations the characters get in because of its time. If any one character in this movie whipped out an iPhone, the plot would cease to exist. But that's fine, if not refreshing, because it's such an old-fashioned movie. I thought Bill Skarsgård as Count Orlok was once again another fire performance from this guy. Dude's famous, don't get me wrong, but I'd almost call him underrated. Willem Dafoe is also in this, and I thought he was great too. I thought it was really well shot, and it had a fair share of scenes that were long, but I wouldn't say it went on for too long. It's a long movie, another one over 2 hours, but I couldn't see it as anything shorter. Pretty much my only critique here is that it's kind of harder to empathize with a lot of the characters in this one. It's pretty common to find things scary, or maybe scary things scarier if being able to put yourself into the shoes of whoever it's happening to. And there is not a single person on planet Earth that was around for 1830s Germany, believe it or not. So it's hard to get too empathetic with the characters, and while the movie does a really good job building a world for itself and making it seem full and lived in, it's hard to be scared in that world because it's so different from the one we currently live in.
All in all, I still quite like this one. I see why it got nominated for a bunch of Oscars. A tier.
You know the drill, this one is already blurred. This one does a lot of what the second one does, but better, arguably. Ugh, I never thought I'd use the word better in a Terrifier review, but here we are. Better itself can be a relative term. Is the plot slightly more bearable? Yeah, you know what? There was a bit of charm to it in parts, I can't lie. I wasn't expecting an original song to be made for this, and the Christmas aspect was well done. The acting was definitely better, and you can tell they took some of the criticisms to heart and delivered a slightly better product. However, there's still a lot that's not great about this. I'll talk more about this in depth in the award show because we have one for Best Gore, but in short, glorifying gore like this and giving it a wide theatrical release and selling this on store shelves, I don't care if you technically need to be over 18 to watch it legally. When has that ever stopped anyone before? Glorifying this is not a good thing. While they do a good job at making the kills progressively more insane and almost laughably stupid at parts, gore is still something that humans have an instinctually repulsive reaction to for a reason. Like, we deliberately evolved to find this repulsive. And while the best of the horror genre can use what we've evolved to be afraid of, or the things we can't control being scared of, to their advantage, this one just shoves it in our faces.
I liked it more than the second one, but not liked it enough to give it anything past D. And because I really want to make a statement, I'm going to demote Terrifier 2 to F.
And here we are, the second half of the bag duology. I know I dug into Baghead pretty harshly, so you might expect me to treat this one easier, but unfortunately it got worse somehow. For my praises, my favorite part about this movie was the kid actor. The kid was fucking adorable, and I loved him, and I hope nothing bad ever happened to him. I thought the fact that the same cop just kept showing up was kind of funny. I got a laugh out of that, and unfortunately that's about where my praises end. This is a movie that's based on an in-universe urban legend called the Bagman, who's taught to kids to make them behave, because he puts them in bags if you don't. I don't even know if I have that all right. It's just a really dumb premise. And it seems interesting, especially in today's wave of nostalgia-based horror. We have horror based on old movies, i.e. Censor, old arcades, i.e. Five Nights at Freddy's. My point is, it's only a matter of time until they start making movies about urban legends. I guess they already have with movies like The Babadook, but the difference with that one is that it's, you know, good and inventive, and stuff actually progresses, all of which are things I unfortunately can't say about this one. It's about as interesting as you'd think it is. It's a challenging task to make a childhood legend scary, one of which I'm pretty sure they just made up for this movie, and they definitely didn't do a great job. Also, for the first time in all of these movies, I'm gonna do something I've never done before. I'm gonna show you a clip from this movie, and I'm gonna play the CinemaSins ding every time there's a cut in the footage, and I want you to just watch and listen and how masterful this editing is.
Jesus fucking Christ, F tier.
This one falls into the category of ones I've heard about, knew it was really big when it came out, and wanted to watch, but never really got around to until this list. This is also the second to last one I'm watching, so maybe my expectations are a little high here. But there is a ton to like about this movie. In case we haven't come across one on the list already, I hate body horror. Hate it in the same way I hate found footage. They're the quickest ways to get me to squirm like a little bitch, and I love it when that happens, so I gotta commemorate them for that. I watched this with my girlfriend, and she can attest my eyes were covered at one point, which says a lot because this isn't really the type of movie to focus on horror too much, which I think is part of the reason I like it so much. I liked it considerably more than most on the list that largely focused on horror, and I thought the more backseat approach worked so well here. I love the direction of this movie. Direction is a hard thing to really put your finger on. If you like how it looks, you go to the camera department. If you like the actors, you go to them. Fucking nobody ever comments on the sound in movies, so you never go to them, but you get the point. But this movie was so brilliantly directed. I love the use of different lenses to make characters look more or less natural. There were some weird things in this movie. They blatantly cross the axis, if you know what that is, and they use some really weird lenses on the characters. There's a lot of nudity and things I'd complain about, but the way they're all used here works so well and really gave this movie a lot of style and uniqueness. Now, I must say, I wasn't a huge fan of the last maybe 20 minutes. This movie at its core is pretty satirical. The thing they use to make a metaphor for substance abuse is called The Substance, if it tells you anything, but I think with the ending they went a little over the top satirical and it turned me away from the movie a little bit.
Not enough to hate it, I just think it could have maybe ended a little earlier and left some more intrigue. That being said, I do like how it tied all of it together and it felt sound, just maybe not handled in the tone I was expecting. It's also the longest movie on the list, coming in at 2 hours and 20 minutes and probably one of the longest commentaries, but it fits the runtime. It deserved the 2.5 hours.
I really like this one. I think it just loses out on the S because of the last couple of minutes, but I think it gets a really high-seated A tier. I see why it got nominated for and won a bunch of Oscars just based on the criteria of the list. I have to give it a high A, though.
Along with The Mirror, this one is purely another joke. It's unfair for me to rank these fairly. I just want to talk about this one because, like the last time I did this, I'm proud of it. However, it's not a joke when I say that this has some of my favorite actors in it. Every time I watch anything to do with this, I'm forever blown away by not only how talented these people are, but how amazing and supportive they were. I was the whopping 16 when I shot this, and it's hard to properly express how cool it is to have these people, some of the best actors I've ever worked with in any capacity, help me bring this little thing to life. I'm so grateful for everyone who hard carried this thing and brought this to what it is today. While this is a 27-minute, no-budget little student movie, it's also representative of what are, without a doubt, some of the best times of my life.
A tier. I'm not too self-indulgent to give this one an S, but damn I want to based on how much fun I had making this one.
One thing I'll give this movie is that every time I've called a movie formulaic, this movie is one of the baselines I judge it on. This commentary might be shorter than the others because it's a really simple movie. Believe it or not, there's a woman in the yard. for like 70% of the movie. Sorry for the spoilers. I feel like this is a very generic Blumhouse horror about a poor family that's really a slow burn to some big revelation that everyone saw coming from the first 10 minutes that tries to be nonchalant and mysterious. See also like 25% of the list. There were a few parts that stood out to me. I liked the third act, which was pretty hit or miss, and for me it hit. I thought it had some cool shots and blink and you miss it moments. For the smaller scale, I thought it was done pretty well. It proves you don't need tons of money to make a movie. This had a $12 million budget. Also, I don't know where else to put this in my commentary, but I saw this opening night, or very close to it, and someone in my theater audibly screamed at one of those fake-out jump scares. Now, there were a bunch of things I didn't really like. Mainly, this did not need to be a movie. This has chronic night swim syndrome where it didn't even need to be 90 minutes. It drags in the middle for a sizable chunk of its already fairly short runtime, and despite liking the ending, I found it to be really disjointed from the rest of the movie. As a final note, the movie really overuses Dutch angles, like, oh my god, it's giving me a headache, your tripod has a level on it.
Again, it was fine. Very, very middle of the road. C tier.
This movie is written and directed by Oz Perkins, who you might recognize because he also made Longlegs, which is insane because these movies came out less than a year apart. But also, as a prime Oz Perkins glazer myself, you already know I thought this one was pretty good. Horror comedies, which this one is, can be really hit or miss, you already know this. Sometimes if I'm going in fully expecting a horror, then I'm not too fond of them, and I'm not trying to glaze Oz Perkins, but this is a damn good horror comedy. I have a lot of similar things to say about this and Longlegs, go figure, but visually it looks great. I thought a lot of the jokes were solid, and there were a few times I had actual reactions to them, which at least takes quite a lot to get from me. Also, the soundtrack in this was great. I deem all of the songs playlist worthy, which is rare because I only ever listen to Monkeys Spinning Monkeys on repeat. Maybe that's why I like this movie. Out of the horror comedies on this list, I think this one does a good job setting a gold standard for the genre. It's pretty damn dark when you think about it, and if it weren't in such a light tone, it could end up being one depressing ass movie if you think about it. But instead, they decide to say death is funny, and I quite liked it.
Because it has its comedy elements, I feel like the highest I can give this one is a B, but hey, take what you can get. This movie gets bonus points for introducing me to the phrase dumb fuck, which I've been calling people ever since I watched this one, so bonus points for it.
This is directed by the same person that made Barbarian, which we covered earlier, and I'd consider this a step up from his previous work. If you were into the horror genre over the summer, this was the sort of big horror of the summer, along the lines of Talk to Me and Longlegs. And for good reason. I thought there was a lot to unpack and to like here. It had some solid tension-building moments and a good mystery behind it that kept me invested the whole time. I also really liked the switching of perspectives, and it felt a lot more developed than it was in Barbarian. I also thought the antagonist and ending, no spoilers here, were well done, and despite sort of coming out of left field, it wasn't too out of left field for me not to enjoy it. More of an, oh, I didn't see that coming type of thing. It comes in at a crisp 90 minutes and is paced quite well. It had some good scares, and while I wasn't on the edge of my seat, I won't give my oh-so-common critique of it not being scary. While it had its odd, almost funny bits, the ending stuck well with me. I like when movies aren't all and they all lived happily ever after and shows there are actually long-lasting effects of everything, which for a movie this scale does. Now, it's not perfect. Zach Krieger's odd sense of humor shows through in some points and makes it hard to take seriously, which I'm a mixed bag about because this, in concept, is a movie you'd want to take seriously.
I still thought it was pretty good, though. Barbarian lays a good groundwork for Zach Krieger, and I think he builds on that with this one. A tier. I'm gonna cry. I just dropped Bringer back on the floor.
This is the third movie out of the last 4 I've seen to have a naked person just for the sake of having one, which is the scariest thing to come out of the horror genre in the last few years. That's my big takeaway. That being said, I really enjoyed this movie. I went into it with no expectations other than seeing it marketed and thought it looked good. Sorry to sound so Gen Z, but it's giving Hereditary with a lot of the stuff here, and given that's my favorite horror movie, I'm all here for it. I thought the acting was great from the entire cast. I thought it looked really nice. Without getting into spoilers, it was grotesque and unnerving and made me want to look away from the screen in all the best ways. While a lot of the time I'm almost hoping for a super dark ending, you know you've set up your characters well when I didn't want that for once. I'd really recommend going into this one blind because there were multiple, and I mean multiple instances of my jaw being on the floor. Seriously, there were some great twists and turns here, and the way they decide to reveal things when they start to click together was so good. Made you feel like you were also solving the mystery. My biggest critique here, and that's not to take away from the movie too much, is maybe the last 5 to 10 minutes. Don't get me wrong, it was still really, really good, and the more I think about it, the more I enjoy it, but at least immediately after watching it for the first time, I know I wasn't the only one that wasn't a huge fan. It makes a ton of sense thematically, and I get what they were going for. Thankfully, it wasn't another skin-deep metaphor for something, though. There was just another chance for the movie to end, like 10 minutes before it actually did, that I thought could have been the perfect cutoff point. Leave us wanting more, and you do a great job. All that's to say is I was really surprised by this one, and the more I think about it, the better it gets in my head.
I thoroughly enjoyed this one, and I really hope I wasn't too spoilery because you want to go into this one blind. Honestly, S tier.
Okay, let me preface. This one, despite being an anthology, is going to be insanely hard to rank on its own. This is very much a send-off to the Conjuring universe as a franchise, which has 4 main movies, each with different antagonists, a trilogy of spin-offs focusing on a villain from the first one, all of which didn't come out in chronological order, 2 other spin-offs focusing on a different villain, a 3rd standalone spin-off just because, oh yeah, and the release order is completely different from chronological order. And no, the other franchise starring Patrick Wilson and made by the same guy is not related to this one. My point being, it's hard to judge a movie that's very clearly meant to be a send-off to all of those, and if you're watching this movie, that's probably what you're going for. This movie is called Last Rites, for crying out loud. It's very much meant to be a send-off. So, you know what? We're close to the end of the list. I'm going to judge this as that and not as a standalone. And for a send-off, I think it does a pretty good job. Normally, I'm not a fan of horror movies with overly happy endings or a sort of everyone lived happily ever after approach, but it was a nice send-off to the characters. So many big horror send-offs are for iconic antagonists, and let's be honest, they all come back in like 5-10 years. So it's rare to see a send-off like this where they're sending off the protagonists. It's nice to see things wrap up. It provided some nice backstory to the Warrens at the start, and I thought it was an overall pretty impressive feat. For a franchise that's, in my opinion, been milked dry, and has been for a while now, they managed to stick the landing with just a few broken bones. Now, there are a few broken bones, there are a few pieces of shit in its pants. It can be pretty self-indulgent at times. It knows that it's the end of an era, and it kind of shoves it down your throat a little bit. It's a bit over the top and has a couple of moments, especially towards the end, that I'd consider as fan service a little bit.
But you know what? It still had a charm. I'd give it an A.
Believe it or not, this is a big movie that I actually managed to see in theaters. I know, hold your applause. Still fashionably late, I saw this in like May, but let me tell you, that didn't detract from it at all. This movie falls into my favorite category of horrors you'll find on this list. It's right up there with Nope, and it's the type of movie that just does an old horror subgenre fresh and without big gimmicks. This is a movie about vampires. It's not some multi-movie franchise or super heavy on it even. It's just a movie about vampires, and the movie doesn't waste time explaining things because it knows the audience is smart enough to know what's going on, and I love it. There's so many good qualities about this movie. The soundtrack is amazing. I need the shit injected into my veins immediately. Michael B. Jordan was great in both of his roles. I've seen probably half a dozen movies now where the lead actor plays multiple roles, and it's very hit or miss as I've talked about before, but it's at its best here. It has some cool uses, looks great, and it makes sense narratively to have them be the same actor. It has some visually striking scenes that looked so good on the big screen, and I love that it only sort of becomes a horror later in the movie. They spend the first 2 acts building up the characters and setting it up as a slow burn period piece drama before going full horror, and that makes when it does get to horror so much more effective because you've gotten to know the characters. And they're like actually cool characters too. Like, I gave a shit about them all, which is kind of rare for me, like especially at this point. Yeah, you know what? All genres included, I see why this is so many people's favorite movie of 2025.
There's very little debate for anyone that's seen this movie. S for Sinners.
It feels like out of all the movies that come out every year, there's at least one that's sort of the horror movie of 20 whatever. I remember Smile was a big must-see, followed by Winnie the Pooh or Five Nights at Freddy's, and a few contenders for 2024, but this was almost without a doubt the big movie of this year. Pretty much everyone was talking about it, or at least heard the name, which I refused to say out loud on the internet, and for good reason. This is a very intriguing premise for a movie, and one that I was excited to see. And I have a bunch of praises. This is definitely one of the shorter ones on the list, and honestly I think it fills its shoes perfectly. If it were to be stretched to 90 minutes, which is a pretty respectable shorter horror movie length, I feel like it would have been dragged on. They did pretty much all they could and they called it there, which I gotta respect. It did pretty much all it could, and they called it there, which I gotta respect. I love Indy, he's such a cute dog, and I think he was a star in this movie. It's amazing seeing the internet come together to love this dog. I thought the cinematography here was really nice to look at, and even though it's not really a part of the movie, if you saw this in theaters, or at least at my screening, there was a little post-credit scene with the director and Indy talking about how they shot it just them in their home over the course of multiple years, and I have a ton of respect for them and the trouble it must have taken to get this all to work. Now, I would like to address possibly my biggest critique with this one. Throughout this list, you've heard me refer to movies as having a gimmick. That gimmick can be something like found footage, or being a period piece, or being a tribute to something. I hope you get the point. A gimmick at its best should be a little choice made during the production of the movie that elevates it and makes it stand out. In this case, it's by being through Indy's perspective. They sure as hell entice audiences, but I think a movie with a gimmick is at its best when you take away the gimmick and it still stands as a great movie. My issue here, and why I bring it up, is that when you take us out of Indy's perspective and try to imagine the movie told more traditionally, it sort of falls apart. 75 minutes is a good runtime for this because you don't have to think too much about the plot, which unfortunately there isn't a ton of here. All that being said, the gimmick was awesome for what it was. It was super inventive and makes it stand out probably more than any other movie on this list.
It's not a perfect movie. I want to give it a higher ranking. I really do. I just think it's best suited in B tier. We've lost When Evil Lurks.
It's on the board.
It is. Fuck me. I'm so used to it being the last movie.
Full disclosure, in my watch order, this one was immediately after Night Swim, so really anything was going to be good after that. But this movie made me learn something about myself. I think I hate bodies. Like, body horror, not like that. I love seeing... I'm just making this worse, aren't I? So it turns out that body horror freaks me out. More than most types of horror do, so you'll probably see a bunch of body horror on the top half of this. This reminded me a lot of The Fly, which it also did for a bunch of other people, and they didn't like it. But I like that movie, sue me, so I'm bound to have liked this one a little bit. It had some jump scares that got me, and some solid tension building, and the makeup freaks me out a bit, especially that one scene in spoiler-free words that involved an arm. If you've seen it, you might know what I'm going for. That being said, there were a few elements where I feel like this movie fell a little flat. You know when a movie has this big thematic revelation at the end that ties everything together, and you realize the movie was actually a metaphor for something, and you've been slowly piecing it together? This movie tries to do that, but it's painfully obvious that you get it like 10 minutes in and then watch the movie try to slowly build to a revelation you clocked an hour ago. The characters were fine. Pretty cookie cutter from a lot of horror movies, which sucks because it would have been a lot better if I cared more and I hadn't played these games before with like every other horror movie, wife and daughter before.
Overall, the body horror worked for me. Higher end of C tier, partly because B tier is already pretty full.
This is our final body horror on the list, so by default, you already know I'm going to think pretty positively about it. I remember when this one came out. I say that like it was a long time ago, it was this year. But I remember people were talking this one up a lot and calling it a movie to never watch with your partner. So obviously I did, and I gotta say, it wasn't that bad. Marketing can play a huge role in how people perceive a movie. That's why people gave Longlegs bad reviews, because all of the marketing set it up as one thing, and it wasn't really like that. And arguably more important, unintentional marketing can be a bigger part. Seeing videos of people's reactions makes me want to go see a movie more, and I feel like some of them were played up a bit. That being said, it was still a pretty enjoyable movie. I like how the couple already started in a not ideal place, so it made them more sympathetic, but also made it more interesting. On one hand, I liked how they didn't waste too much time on establishing a backstory for the Together virus, or whatever you want to call it, and that worked and kept up the intrigue, but whatever information they did include was revealed nicely. However, it isn't perfect. There were a few moments here that made it hard to take seriously. There's a very grotesque shot of a penis in this movie, and a few jokes that take you out of the horror a bit, and there's one shot that's basically a crash zoom on a character, and this might be a Mandela effect, but I swear to you, there was a little vroom when we first looked at that character, which, needless to say, was pretty funny. But also, I thought the rest of it was fairly well executed up until the end.
While it wasn't the scariest, it was pretty original and had some interesting characters and was overall pretty good. I gotta give it an A tier.
This is a fun movie. I'd argue it's pretty representative of the current state of movies right now, too. It's got Jack Quaid and Sophie Thatcher, both pretty big-name actors currently, and they both deliver really good performances in this one. The whole movie looks and feels very modern, if that makes any sense. The cinematography looks like it came out this year, and the premise is something you could see in an 80s sci-fi movie, but they now choose to handle it more as something that probably will happen sometime soon in the near future. And the movie handles it in that way pretty effectively. I never wasn't interested while watching this. I thought the reveals they had were well-structured, and the whole last act was done really well. Normally, I'm not a huge fan when the climax of a movie feels like it can end multiple times, but this one had its moments where they worked for me. Now, I need to preface what I'm about to say here. I really did enjoy this movie. By all accountable means, it was good. It was solid. Now, I need to remind everyone that this is a tier list about horror movies, and going back to what I said in the intro, scare factor plays a huge part in these. Tech horror, i.e. this and Megan, don't work too much for me, and while I enjoyed it a lot, I didn't care too much for the little horror moments. It's one of the lightest on the list, and
unfortunately, I have to give this one a C tier. If it was ranking these on anything else, it would get a higher ranking, but unfortunately, it's plagued by the criteria of the list.
And after probably over an hour, we're at the last movie of the list. I'm writing this little segment a few hours before going to see this movie, and I gotta say, I'm a little scared. This is from the same director that made Sinister, one of my all-time favorite horror movies, and what some of you might not know, Doctor Strange. Also a pretty universally liked movie. Problem, both of the sequels are pretty hot ass, depending on who you ask, so...
2 hours later.
Okay, let me unpack my thoughts here. This is the rare, pure, out-of-theater experience. There's actually a lot to like here. Like, I know I was nervous about this one, and I still had those expectations in the back of my mind that it was going to be good, and I'm happy to say that it lived up to my expectations. This is sort of exactly what I thought it would be. I really like how they handled everybody's character, especially Mason Thames' Finney, who's just a total badass in this movie, and it made for a super interesting watch, and it also felt pretty realistic. The Grabber was also a lot more developed in this one, and I like that except for a few small things I'll talk about later. Dude was straight up aura farming with Mason Thames. We're gonna start the awards early and give the most aura award to these guys. If I had to pick a word to describe this movie, it wouldn't be scary or boring, but probably awesome. It had some really cool sequences, the music was really good, and the acting and direction was great. Now, I do have a few critiques here. They focused the sequel a lot more on Gwen, and that's a very logical way to take the sequel. My problem is that they made Mason Thames nearly too interesting that I thought it should have revolved around him again. I didn't really like the comic relief character too much. It has its odd jokes here and there that work, but I just didn't like how there was just a comedic relief character. I like that we learn more about the Grabber, and this might be a small spoiler, but we learn his name, and people call him it, which kind of gets rid of some of the mystery around his character. Sometimes it was hard to understand the Grabber through the mask, but those are like my only gripes about this one. So, is it better than the original? Yeah, I think it's a smidge better than the original. They're very different movies. This one is more supernatural for sure, but I found it maybe a bit more entertaining. But the first movie had a bit more of a vibe, if you ask me. I'd give it the same ranking in A tier. I didn't like it enough to justify it going from A to S. If it were maybe C to B, then absolutely, but S is just too coveted.
I would give it the same ranking as I gave the original. Maybe a hair better, but I can't really justify it going from A to S. If it were maybe C to B, then absolutely, but I think S is just too coveted. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the list. There's a lot of movies now that I look at it like that. It's been a really long ride. I'm sorry that it took so long, but I'm really happy with all the rankings. Now I think it's time we really celebrate some of these and the individual qualities that they have. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the awards. But this doesn't look too award show worthy. Just give me a second. That's better. Alright, now that we have all the rankings done and you know my overall thoughts on all of them, I think it's time we give out some awards to really highlight the best of some of these categories. I've picked the awards from all sorts of different places on the list. It's not like all the S tiers are going to get awards and nobody else is. We have them pretty diversified. So here's a little bit on how the structure is going to work. I'm going to call out an award, talk a little bit about it, talk about what it means to have that award, and then I'm going to introduce our nominees. We're going to have 5 nominees for each category unless noted otherwise. Then I'm going to announce my winner and give my reasoning for the winner. You at home are welcome to applaud or boo in your seat. You're just going to look like a fucking weirdo. This video has already been stupid long, and I want to spend a little bit of time on these, so we're going to get right into the first main category. Our first category of awards is we're doing our Best of Each Year award. So I'm going to start with the Best of 2020, do 3 nominees, because if I did the normal 5, then we're nominating half the list, and that feels dumb. I'm going to go through Best 2020, and the winner of that award also gets a nomination for Best Overall. So we'll have the 6 nominees, Best of Each Year, competing for Best Overall. We're going to start the show with the Best of 2020 award. And in a world where the streets are empty outside of racial injustice protests and all the other things that were happening this year, sometimes the best therapy is to go watch terrible things to happen to somebody else on a screen. This year has sort of slim pickings. I'm not going to lie, there aren't a ton to write home about in this year, but our nominees are as follows. Spree, for its fresh take on the horror genre, and it proves that you don't need to be taken too seriously to be a horror movie. His House, for its inventive take on the haunted house game and having some nice themes and visuals along with it. And lastly, Host, for its time capsule nature of the year and also being just a good movie overall. It's nice and fresh and original. While these 3 do stand out and they make a good case for each getting the award, I feel like there's one that's fairly obvious. And the Best 2020 award goes to Host. Host is a special movie to win this award because it's an accurate time capsule for what this year was like, so it's fitting to give it the win. It has some creative scares and puts a lot of creative limits on itself with the style of the movie, but it has a great vision, lots of care behind it, and really uses what it has to its maximum. And this one also gets a nomination for Best Overall. Now we take over to the new year with the Best of 2021 award. This is another fairly diversified award. We got some good ones and also some not good ones, but isn't that just the nature of the list? Anyways, our nominees for this year are Malignant, for its powerful third act and well-done characters. The Black Phone, despite some of you saying it should be in 2022 with its boatload of charm and kidnapping shenanigans. And Candyman, for its racial injustice themes and for being a pretty solid reboot, all things considered. All of these present pretty interesting cases and showcase the highs of the genre pretty well, but I mean, if you've seen the last award show, which like maybe 5 of you have, you know I'm a big fan of one director specifically. Ladies and gentlemen, The Black Phone. The Black Phone is one I wish to include on the last list and lives up to the legacy of not only the previous Scott Derrickson movies, God I fucking love Sinister, but also the praise it got both commercially and from audiences. This movie oozes 1970s charm through its art design, wardrobe, and Pink Floyd? Okay. It delivers a great story that not only does a lot with surprisingly little, and also knows exactly the points of the story it should focus on. Now we come to easily one of the most difficult awards to pick a winner for. It's time for Best 2022. 2 of our nominees are S tiers, which is already the highest ranking I can give. 2022 was a year full of stupid memes, Elon Musk buying Twitter, Chrissy Wake Up, and plenty more. It was also a really good year for horror, so without any further ado, we get into our nominees. Nope, the 3rd film directed by Jordan Peele, and it's just such a great movie. And it proves him yet again as a great director. Smile, for its cool premise and interesting jump scares. And lastly, Incantation, for its found footage style, non-linear storytelling, and arguably even better jump scares. You've seen how I reacted to those ones. Ultimately, these all get nominated for other categories, so it just came down to who gets what nominations. These are all really good, but that being said, we have to pick one to represent the year. And I think we do. Ladies and gentlemen, will I tell you the award? Nope. Yeah, you know I had to give this one something. It's original, has great characters, a fresh plot, and while maybe not carrying the scares of the other ones, it was the thrill ride through to the end. With a lot of the categories being scare-centric, I knew I had to squeak in a win for this one.
The sticky tack came off of this one.
Before we begin this award, I'd like to take a moment of silence for all of those we lost in the tragedy of the Titan submersible. This award is dedicated to the victims involved and the game controller. Thank you. Now for our 3 nominees. Five Nights at Freddy's, for how it united all the 8-year-olds within the land, including me. Followed by Talk to Me, the Australian hit that poses a strong metaphor. And When Evil Lurks, for its bleak tone and fresh take on the zombie possession genre. I'm not gonna lie, being sandwiched between 22 and 24 makes this one a rough spot. But that's not stopping these 2 directors. The Best 2023 award goes to Talk to Me. Talk to Me is another one I missed off rip and went to for this list, and I gotta say I now see what all the buzz is about. It's amazingly modern without being terribly cringy, it's gripping and enticing without being overbearing, and it's a great watch I'd recommend to all of you. 2024. Personally, one of the best years of my life, if you ask me. This is the year where the current US president was convicted of 30+ felonies, shot, and then won an election within the same year. It was a big ride. That being said, regardless of your political stance, I think we can all enjoy some movies. And I think we can all agree there were some pretty fire ones coming out this year, including our nominees: The Substance, the Oscar-nominated and winning body horror that sheds light on fame and substance abuse. Smile 2, for being, in my opinion, one of the best horror sequels out there, for not only expanding on the original, but just outdoing it. And last but not least, The Man Who Doesn't Sleep, Osgood Perkins' Longlegs. I call him the man that doesn't sleep because he's made at least 3 movies since this one came out last year. This is another insane category. We're doing 2 S tiers and an A tier that was almost S. After a lot of consideration, I think that the best suited one for this award is Longlegs. Longlegs is a brilliant twist on the serial killer genre, and one that I think outdoes a lot of the others on this list. It's your pretty normal serial killer movie, but by the end it delves into more supernaturally and devilly stuff. And let me tell you, I know a lot of people weren't happy with that combo, but I thought it worked really, really well. It worked like bread and butter with the leads of Michael Monroe and Nicolas Cage. Coupled with the 1970s vibe, soundtrack, and cinematography, all works together to make it a great representative for 2024. 2025, despite technically not being over yet, has been another pretty wild year.
I don't know why I said it's technically not over yet. It's November by the time you're watching this. It's pretty obviously not fucking over, dumbass.
Big year for Netflix shows. Memes have now completely gone to shit. But at least we got some good movies out of it. And I'm quite content with calling these 3 the nominees, despite the year not being done yet. We had some great movies come out this year, and I have to preface that this is once again another choice of what got nominated for other categories already. Kicking off the list of nominees, we have Sinners. Some fucking brilliance of filmmaking with an amazing cinematographer, soundtrack, and score. Followed by The Conjuring: Last Rites, a conclusion to a over decade-long horror franchise. Lastly, we have the successor of Talk to Me, Bring Her Back, for its amazing plot, well-crafted scares, and just cool kid. Again, these all get nominated for other things, so no hard feelings about what loses. This winner is one that provides story, horror, emotion, and so many other things in one viewing. Ladies and gentlemen, Bring Her Back. This one is great for all of the reasons I said in my commentary. It's a crazy feat to top Talk to Me, let alone by so much, so bravo. And here we are, we're at best overall already. It's been a while getting here, but I am super happy with our nominees. To break it down again, we have Host, Black Phone, Nope, Talk to Me, Longlegs, and Bring Her Back, each representing their year. And all of them are amazing representatives, and it's hard to just look at them all and pick one, so we're gonna take it a different approach. We're just gonna pick them off one by one until we have a winner. Right off the bat, I'm getting rid of Talk to Me. It's a great movie, but we already have something from the same directors on this list, and I'd argue this one's better, so it feels weird to have 2 from the same directors. Now cue the dramatic music, because next on the chopping block, Host. Again, it's a great movie, just with the runtime that it has, it's hard to top some of these other ones. Now we're down to the final 4, all of which are great, but let me remind you that we are judging these on single movies, and one of them just got a sequel, so it's hard to consider it when it's technically just the first half of the story. I'm sorry, The Black Phone, you were really, really good, and so was your sequel, but you gotta get out of here. And 4th place ain't too bad. The final 3 is where it gets really tricky. These are all S tiers, so it's not really judging on tier ranking anymore, but now is when the horror of horror movie tier list gets really important, because one of these isn't nearly as scary as the others. Nope. Your time was here, and I loved you, but alas, there are 2 better ones. Between Longlegs and Bring Her Back, both attack the genre from very different ways, so it's hard to compare them side by side, so instead I'm gonna go for my first watch experiences. I was lucky to go into both of these blind and be pleasantly surprised by both of them. However, one of these gave me all sorts of different emotions, and one has only gotten better the more I think about it. Ladies and gentlemen, the winner for Best Overall is Bring Her Back. I'll keep my little acceptance speech short because, spoilers, this isn't the only time this one's winning an award. This is an amazing movie all around, and one that I am super happy to showcase with Best Overall. I've split the remainder of the awards into 2 sections. We're going to do all of the creative awards, including Best Gore, Kill, Jump Scare, Antagonist, Ending, Most Original, and a So Bad It's Good award. After that, we'll go into all the production-y ones, so Best Cinematography, Writing, Editing, Actor, Score, and Directing. Considering it's already been way too long, let's just jump straight into it. Boo! If you couldn't tell, we're doing best jump scare now. Full disclosure, after watching 60 movies in the span of like 3 months, jump scares don't really work on me that much anymore, but there were still some really good ones here. A good jump scare has a few different components to it. Not only does the scare need to be scary, obviously, but so much of what makes it work comes from the build-up. If I were to just throw in a jump scare here all of a sudden, it wouldn't be that scary, right? Again, I'll list the nominees and then I'm going to call spoilers so I can specify, but without any further ado, our nominees are Smile, the original, Host was good, Barbarian had a good one, Paranormal Activity, Next of Kin, and lastly, Incantation. Okay, now is your spoiler warning. Okay, more specifically, Smile for the dislocating head jump scare, Host for the few scattered throughout the third act, they're all really good, Barbarian for when Bill Skarsgård appears in the darkness, the action isn't that scary, but it works, Paranormal Activity for anything that's not in the dogshit third act, and Incantation for, I don't even know what I'd call this one. If you paid close attention to my commentaries, you'll notice one of these movies kept getting brought up for a jump scare in it. Ladies and gentlemen, Incantation. You're probably thinking of that one clip I've shown throughout the video, and while that's definitely a pretty big reaction, that apparently wasn't even my worst one. According to my girlfriend, I, quote, got super freaked out and like hunched my shoulders, brought my hands up to my face to like cover it, and looked away, and like you were visibly shaking. Like not a lot of shaking, but it was still there, and it was fucking hilarious because your eyes were also closed. None of this happened. Next up, best gore. I've already talked about this briefly when we covered Terrifier 3, but I want to preface this award by saying something. This isn't the best award to label as a best of. Don't get me wrong, gore can definitely be used to exemplify a movie or add a gross factor to it or make it even more realistic. But there's a certain point where it crosses the line and just becomes torture porn, and I think that that's not something I should glorify. Regardless, our nominees are Terrifier 2 and Terrifier 3. I mean, come on, these guys are like the staples for gore in the genre, and at this point, do I even bother nominating anything else? Together for the body horror aspect of it, Bring Her Back for being a dentist's worst nightmare, and The Substance, because I also just hate body horror, it turns out. All of these movies have, let's be honest, no shot against the Terrifiers, so it's really just the two of them, and I gotta give the gorier one Terrifier 3. As we get into the awards, I want to preface that I'm trying not to have that many two-time award winners. I made the terrible mistake of watching the second half of this movie right after I had picked up a nice sandwich for lunch, and I was really excited to eat it, and then I watched a dude get his cock and balls cut off with a chainsaw. Out of the whole list, it's the only one to give me some sort of reaction where I kind of felt sick, so I guess I can respect it for that. Going back to what I said oh so long ago in the intro, originality plays a huge part in my rankings for these, so much so we have an award for it. Originality is a huge selling point for people to go see these movies. If it weren't for making this list, I wouldn't have seen so many of the boring ones on this list. So here are some of the ones that I found the most original. Here are our nominees. We've got The Menu for its good take on horror comedies that adds a new twist with the ending. Talk to Me for its inventive metaphors and modern feel. Good Boy for its unique perspective on things. Together for how it unifies its audience. I'm so funny. And Host for being both a movie and a time capsule. There's a lot of good on this list, but I have to give it to the goodest. Good boy. I mean, was there any question that this wouldn't win most original? The movie is shot from a dog's perspective, for crying out loud. That's a pretty new thing. It's a great premise, and while maybe not being the most... interesting once you take that premise away, it's hard to deny that it's still super original. It's still something we've never seen before, and I think it deserves massive praise for that. Now we're moving on to best ending. I've critiqued a ton of things on this list for having a bad ending, and I think it can take a ton of effort to do one well. It can also sort of kill a movie if you don't have a good ending. What good is going on a roller coaster if you crash into a fucking wall at the end? My allegories for roller coasters that finish well are The Menu, again, back-to-back first nominations. For its weirdly poetic ending, like it feels different for what horror comedies should have. But oddly, I'm all here for it. Bring Her Back. I know I bashed the ending in my commentary, but really the more I've thought about it, the more it's grown on me. The Conjuring 4 for how it wraps up a decade-long franchise and actually sticks the landing. Smile 2 for its cliffhanger ending, but also serves as a sound conclusion to the now franchise. And lastly, Sinners for its great third act and conclusion. These are all great, but I think the winner is pretty obvious, at least if you know me. I think the award goes to Smile 2. In my opinion, endings are best when you sort of know what's going to happen in them already, and the movie treats it like it's an inevitability. That's a good way to make things seem sound when they get there, and you can have some pretty interesting stuff happen along the way. And this movie really plays around with the third act and makes the ending great. It feels really deserved, and it's the rare time I don't want a Smile 3. Now we're going to handle what our best antagonist of the list is. For this one, I'm nominating both individual movies and franchises. If you have an antagonist that appears in 2 movies, I can nominate the antagonist and both movies will like share the nomination. I'm not going to nominate Smile 1 and 2, I'm just going to nominate the Smile Demon. A good antagonist is a crucial part of any horror movie. They're a good part of what makes the movie scary. Not only do they push the plot forward and provide for a lot of the scares in the movie, but they also have to be interesting enough, while all not giving too much away or else it ruins the intrigue of the character. Our nominees are the Smile Demon, as I've already mentioned, Longlegs of Longlegs, Pearl of both Pearl and X, Art the Clown of the Terrifier franchise, and the Grabber from the Black Phone franchise. All of these are pretty iconic antagonists that have kind of made a name for themselves in the last couple of years, but in my opinion, the award goes to the Grabber of the Black Phone franchise. Maybe this one is a little bit of recency bias, I can admit, but I think the second entry in the franchise really hits home on the Grabber as an antagonist. His look is iconic, he has some pretty iconic gestures and quotes, and it feels like the movies rely on him for substance rather than the plot or the other characters. Longlegs doesn't really work alone, and Art's very little once you take away the gore. Not to mention just how much aura the Grabber had in the sequel, like goddamn. The next award we're going to be doing is for the best kill of each of the movies. This is another one where I'm going to announce the nominees and then call spoilers and then go more in depth. And just to get straight into our nominees, we have Five Nights at Freddy's, we got X, we got Bring Her Back Again, Terrifier 3, and Smile 2. Now I'll give you a second to skip to the next award. These get nominated for The Bite of 87 kill, Pearl getting run over with a car, Andy from Bring Her Back being hit by a car and then drowned, one of the moments that have my jaw on the floor, Art blowing up a bunch of kids in Terrifier 3, and a tie between the opening and ending kills of Smile 2. Maybe I just really like seeing people getting hit by cars. And if there were any reactions cited from me listing those, it's pretty clear what one I think should win. And the winner is blowing up kids in a fucking mall in Terrifier 3. While I have my thoughts on the Terrifier movies, it's hard to deny that they don't do a good job in some parts of making the kills so stupid you almost have to laugh. And it's hard to deny that this one wasn't just kind of fucking awesome. It's not too gory, especially for the franchise standards. And it's something about the way you see the explosion like 9 different times from different angles that really just sells it for me.
I wonder what I got. Hurry!
Foreshadowing in it was pretty well done, and you know exactly what's going to happen, but you still find it stupidly funny. I've been advised to state that I'm not glorifying child murder, or whatever that means, but this one was pretty awesome. We're doing a So Bad It's Good award, and our nominees are just the F tiers. If you know me, I think being bad is sort of like a circle. You start at the top and it's really, really good, and then you start to go around the circle, you get your A's, your B's, your C's, your D's, and then you get your F's way at the bottom. The bottom is sort of the worst it can possibly be, but then if you keep following the circle, you get worse and worse and worse and worse. Suddenly, it gets good again. And out of all of the movies, there's one I've really hated to put in F tier. The winner is The Unholy. And instead of talking about this movie and why I think it deserves the So Bad It's Good award, I'm just going to show you. Spoilers for anybody that cares enough about this amazing atrocity of a movie. But I'm going to show you what might be the best thing I've ever seen.
Get back.
The Unholy, everybody. Now's when we would segue into the more production-y awards, but since I'm bad at segues, I thought we'd throw in one extra award just for fun.
Hi, I'm the girlfriend. Now, in all honesty, I have only seen like half of the movies. Actually, 44% of the Letterboxd list, if we're being exact. But Ben asked me if I wanted to do a little award, and I said, yeah, sure. Pretty much the criteria for this award is that I picked my 5 favorite ones that I liked watching, and then I pick which one I liked the most. It's really not that hard. So my nominees are Good Boy, purely because of how adorable Indy is. I absolutely adore him. Bring Her Back, probably one of the most interesting movies that I've like fully have ever seen. And I've seen Shark Boy and Lava Girl. So Weapons, because I think that was maybe my 4th horror film that I've ever seen before in my life, because I'm a bitch and I can't watch horror. Five Nights at Freddy's, because I was basically raised on this franchise and big nostalgia value. I think that's the right word. And then finally Together. I don't know, it just all around good movie. I quite enjoyed it. And oh, I forgot to put the nominees on. For the winner of this lovely, amazing Me Award goes to Together. Now, in all honesty, I did want to give it to Good Boy because, like I said, Indy's really cute, but it already won an award and I wanted to spread out. The reason I picked Together is just because it's kind of an all-around good movie. Like, there wasn't ever a point where I'm like, damn, this movie kind of sucks, actually. Am I good?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Now we're going to start with the production-y stuff, and what better way to kick it off than with our Best Cinematography Award. Cinematography is one of the biggest components about making a movie. If you don't have cinematography, you just have an audiobook. The visual aspect for some of these allows for so many more ways of storytelling. Colors, angles, and different lenses can all tell a story different from what the actual movie is trying to say. Some of the movies I think best portray this are Longlegs, Barbarian, Sinners, Pearl, and Nosferatu. All of these movies have very distinct color palettes, a brilliant team behind them making sure they look as good as they can, and it's clear every shot had a ton of care put into it. While all of these looked great, I think the winner is pretty clear. I give the award to Longlegs. Something that really sticks out to me for this one is how nearly every shot in this movie not only looks great, but almost always has some staircase you can't see the top of, dark corner, or some kind of negative space. It really boosts the atmosphere and lets your mind wander and makes you think you see things. And you know what? Sometimes there just fucking is. They disappear after a second, but they really convince you that there is something there. Now for the best writing, which is pretty much the groundwork for all of the movies on this list. Good writing consists of developed characters, logical premises, and in horror especially, the right balance of revealing things and keeping them mysterious. There's a lot else, take a writing class. There's a lot else, take a writing class if you're interested, but for now, our nominees are Nope, Bring Her Back, Sinners, Black Phone 2, almost fell over, and Smile 2. I didn't realize that we nominated 4 S tiers. That's a little bad of me. I've included some sequels here because it's hard to write sequels, and I gotta give them credit where credit is due, but I gotta say, the award and my personal favorite goes to Bring Her Back. I told you this wasn't the last time you'd see it on the list. This is such a well-written movie. Unfortunately, the PDF of the script is unavailable to read anywhere, but it's such a good lesson on pacing, character work, making good reveals. And if you don't really care how movies look, not to say that this one doesn't look amazing, this would probably be my #1 recommendation for you. Editing, which our next award is for, can be a pretty hard thing to pinpoint. There's a saying that good editing is unnoticeable, so picking nominees for this award is really tricky because you're judging something on how little you can notice something. That being said, I was able to pick some nominees. Like cinematography, editing can also be used to tell a story, and I think a lot of my nominees do that. Host, Incantation, Censor, Good Boy, and Sinners. And Sinners. All of these either have a gimmick that makes editing them hard, or are sinners and you're just a good movie, and I needed 5 nominees to round out the list. Each movie does something here to stand out, and I gotta give it props for that. With all that being said, the award goes to Good Boy. I decided to give this one Best Editing purely to commemorate the amount of time that something like this takes to edit. They shot this in 1 to 3 hour chunks over 3 years, so there were mountains of footage they had to comb through to make this work. I've had my fair share of jobs as an editor where I look at all the footage and realize that 90% of it is unusable. So it's a feat to make an entire movie out of what had to have been needles in a haystack of takes. And I just want to commemorate the amount of time that must have taken with this award. Our penultimate award goes to the best actor in any of these movies. We're judging per character in a single movie. I'm not going to nominate Ethan Hawke for the Black Phone 1 and 2, I'm just going to pick one and nominate him for that. That being said, I've chosen to nominate Mia Goth as Pearl from Pearl, Lily Rose Depp as Ellen Hutter in Nosferatu, Indy as himself in Good Boy, Demi Moore as Elizabeth Sparkle in The Substance, and Naomi Scott as Sky Riley in Smile 2. We have a ton of powerhouses in this category, and it's a really tricky one to give an award to, but one of these has had the crown emoji next to it on my little note since about 2/3 of the way through watching the movie. Ladies and gentlemen, Mia Goth. I had the awards planned out from the start, along with the movies I picked, but didn't really nominate anything for the first little bit. But let me tell you, this movie features a 6-minute-long, uncut monologue from Mia Goth, and while watching it, I took out my phone and put her down. In the other one, she's great, but she hard carries this movie and is a huge contributing factor to its success. Absolute powerhouse. Everyone go watch this one. Now's probably a good time to mention that I am getting so many copyright claims on this video, so much so that I would be surprised if I didn't have to re-upload this at some point, which means for the Best Score award, I can't actually play you any of the music in the movies, which makes the award pretty hard to do, but I'm gonna try. I'm gonna note that I'm talking about the original music made for these movies. The Black Phone is not gonna win because it features Pink Floyd in both of their movies. While that's awesome, that's not really what we're looking for in this category. All that being said, our nominees are Smile 2, Sinners, Longlegs, and what the hell, we'll give The Substance a nomination too. All of these have a pretty different and unique type of music in them that only exemplifies the scenes in the movie. And I'm gonna be really honest, this one is a clean sweep. Only one of these nominees has a 22-song album to come out with their movie. Ladies and gentlemen, it's no surprise, Sinners. This is the only one on the entire list with a big enough focus on music to justify having such a full soundtrack. This movie is about blues music, which not only had a bit of a revival for me after seeing this, but makes the movie so much more interesting and better. One of the easiest awards to hand out for the entire list. Our final award, one to close out the entire video, is one for Best Directing. There's a reason I've included the director for each one of these movies in my commentary. They're the visionaries behind the entire movie. If you see a choice you like or don't like, that's the director doing that. Your job as a director is to have the movie in your mind's eye before anybody else, and then work with the cast and crew to bring that said vision to life. And there's a lot of life breathed into some of these, and I've narrowed it down to a few. We've got Ty West for Pearl, Oz Perkins for Longlegs, Ryan Coogler for Sinners, Waldemar Johansson for Lamb. I really hope I pronounced that one right. And Coralie Farge for The Substance. Again, I hope I pronounced that one right. All of these movies are unique and have a ton of style, and it's very clear that the director had a crystal clear vision when making these movies. That being said, one of these sticks out to me, and I have to give our final award on the list to The Substance. I remember a while ago I was on a set. I want to say I was having a conversation with one of the PAs and the sound guy, and the sound guy said something to me that stuck with me ever since. He went something along the lines of, yeah, there are rules and it's good to follow them, but you should also break a couple of rules. They're not like capital R rules, you should also break a couple of them. There was more to it, but that's sort of what I remember, so shout out to you, Corey. And this is a movie that's not afraid to take risks. There's some really weird but cool choices here, a lot of which I've touched on in my commentary. Pretty much every aspect, the acting, colors, shots, music of the movie all work together under a clear vision to make one hell of a movie. Plus, it just feels weird not having The Substance win anything. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes the award show and by extension the video. I can finally take the suit off. Good God. Thank God. It was hot as hell in that suit. We're back to a Bruzzo now. I bought this shirt just for the video because I thought it was funny. In case you couldn't tell, this has been easily, without a doubt, the biggest video I've ever worked on. We just passed words 27,500, if that says anything. And if you somehow watched up until now without being bored, thank you. I hope you finished whatever project you're working on with me in the background, or statistically with a video this long, there's probably one of you that's asleep by now. So sweet dreams and thanks for the watch time. Regardless of where you are or what you're doing, I appreciate everybody watching this video up until now. I hope you're not too pissed at me for some of the rankings and awards here. This video was a mountain of fun to make, and normally I would say subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this, but you guys are not getting a video like this for a while. I'm gonna take some time off and maybe upload again, you know, never say never. But for the first time, I'm not sure. After 6 years of doing this, good God, it finally feels like I'm at a good conclusion here. I'd rather have it go out with a bang rather than fade away type of thing. It sucks to say goodbye, it really does. I've appreciated every single one of you that have stopped and do any of my videos at some point. Whether you're from a horror movie video, or that Minecraft series I did, or one of the like 200 of you that are from the Lego Ninjago video, or just someone I've met along the way. It's hard to put into words how cool it is to be able to do this for an audience. I know there's gonna be a few of you that say, well, why are you stopping now if you had so much fun doing this video? And the truth is, I'm speaking largely to the group that know me personally, this was never the end goal. This was. I've written a new movie, one that I'm really proud of and super eager to make. And finally, it's one that's big enough to be on this tier list, which is exactly what you'll find me doing for the next couple of years. Who knows, maybe it'll be on the big screen one day. If I were to go back to when I was 10 years old and show myself where I would be right now and show them the level of content I'd be able to make, I'd have a stroke. I've done everything I've wanted to do. I've done that Minecraft series I've always wanted to do. I've done an hour-long video, which was on my to-do list. I've made those movies I've always wanted to make. I've taught myself how to edit. Imagine being able to watch yourself grow up. Not just physically, but also see you as a person evolve, see your sense of humor change, see your skills evolve. Every video here, regardless of how good they are in quality, is representative of a point in my life and where I was at the time. And it's such a gift to be able to go back and watch some of those and just relive some old memories. And what's really weird about all of this are the times where I've decided I want to be done. All the times I thought I should stop or was discouraged enough to where I didn't want to do this anymore. This was, is, and always will be my dream, or at least some variation of it. And the best piece of advice I can give for any of you watching is to just do it. Maybe it's not content, right? Maybe it's something else, but my best piece of advice is to just do what I did and just do it. How are you supposed to make a career out of something if you can't start doing it for a day? You're gonna have to start somewhere small, and yeah, you're gonna be disappointed and discouraged at parts. That's unfortunately part of the journey. There are going to be setbacks and hills you have to get over and people that don't believe in you. That's unfortunately part of the creative process. But if you have the passion and the determination to get over those humps, you're in for some of the best times of your life. You're not just gonna blink and you're exactly where you wanna be. No, you have to work towards it. And the working towards it is what I see discouraging so many people, but the sacrifices pale in terms of the rewards you can get. What makes this journey so special for everybody to go on is that feeling of where you finally are where you wanna be and you're able to look back on all the years it took you to get there and be proud of it. Where you're able to look back on all that's happened to you, the good and the bad, and have this odd sense of gratefulness to it. You know what? Out of all the things that have happened to me in my life, the good and the bad, I don't think I would have it any other way. And I'm trying to get you to feel the same. I want to thank you all, truly, from the bottom of my heart, whether I know you in person, whether I don't, for being a part of this journey with me. Every comment brightens my day, and every time someone gets a chuckle out of what I do, it brightens my day. Now, I don't know exactly how I want to end this. I don't know what I want my last words to be. Oh, maybe I'll end it right now so that you guys are left on a cliffhanger.